Dear listeners and friends, just after I gave birth to twins via a C-section, my torty dash. Husband abandoned me in the maternity ward to take his first love to her. Antenatal scan downstairs. He snapped, "You wanted to give birth, so raise them. Yourself." 3 hours later, the chairman of a luxury empire came looking for me, claiming I was his long-lost daughter. With trembling hands holding the divorce papers, my husband later stuttered, "We can talk about this later." Please give Amelia a like and share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the Untold Stories channel so you never miss a great Daily Tale. On the day I gave birth to my twins, my husband was on the floor below at the twins' times. Exact same hospital, escorting my adopted sister to her ultrasound. Hearing it, you might think it was a fictional plot from a primetime soap opera, yet it happened right in my own life. It was so glaringly real that I could no longer deceive myself. I lay on the hospital bed in the private wing of the Portland Hospital in London. My lower abdomen throbbed with a dull, relentless ache, and my legs felt like jelly, as if they no longer belonged to me. Beside me were two tiny, red-faced infants that the midwife had just brought in. The little boy lay on the left, the little girl on the right. Both were minuscule, their skin still wrinkled, occasionally pursing their lips as if rooting for milk. I reached out and gently touched my baby's hand, a tiny fingertip wrapped around my pinky ever so softly. Yet, in that beautiful moment, my heart ached so profoundly I could barely breathe. The man who should have been standing beside me, the man who should have been the first to look at our children, was currently with Eleanor, the biological daughter of my adoptive parents. She was also the woman Charles Kensington had loved to the point that all of London's high society knew about it. The maternity hospital was crowded that afternoon. Out in the corridor, I could hear the occasional footsteps of nurses, the rattle of a medication trolley rolling across the linoleum floor, and the cry of a newborn from another room that was quickly hushed. But inside my room, everything was strangely, bitterly cold. It hadn't even been 5 hours since my surgery. My body was incredibly weak, and the pain in my abdomen pulled in sharp waves, as if someone were violently twisting me from the inside. The temporary maternity nurse arranged by the hospital helped me pour some warm water. Seeing my pale face, she asked softly, "Mrs. Kensington, would you like me to call your family to come up?" I looked at her for a moment, then shook my head. My throat was so dry I could barely force out a few words. "No need, thank you." Saying it out loud made me feel ridiculous. I don't have any family to call. My adoptive parents were likely by Eleanor's side right now, and my husband was with her too. I had just given birth to a pair of twins for him, yet the only person beside me was a stranger paid by the hour. Gossip reached my ears very quickly. Outside the door, two young nurses changing shifts thought I was asleep. They kept their voices low, but every word drifted clearly into my ears. One said, "I heard she's the wife of the CEO of Kensington Holdings, but down on the 6th floor, there's another woman who's also pregnant. Apparently that's his ex-girlfriend." The other sighed. "So, who is actually the third party?" The first replied quickly. "Do you even have to ask?" "The ex-girlfriend. They were in love first. This wife probably only married him when he had that terrible car crash." I lay perfectly still on the bed, staring at the stark white ceiling, my hands unconsciously gripping the edge of the blanket. I wanted to sit up and tell them that I wasn't the other woman, that Charles and I were legally married, and that, for the past 3 years, I had never stolen anything from Eleanor, but might actually anything subplurtier. Throat choked up because I knew that if my own husband wouldn't clear my name, my explanations would only sound like a joke. 3 years ago, I was married off to Charles Kensington under less than glorious circumstances. At the time, he had just been in a horrific accident on the M4 motorway. His car was so mangled that the rescue team had to cut the doors off to get him out. The doctors said he might be paralyzed for life. The Kensington family was in chaos, and Eleanor? She flew to Switzerland that very night, leaving behind a flippant message saying she couldn't handle the pressure. My adoptive parents, Arthur and Beatrice Davies, took me to the Kensington Selvan estate. They told me this was my chance to change my destiny, and that it was time for me to repay the Davies family for raising me. I was only 22. Back then, terrified and feeling deeply wronged, but I nodded. From a young age, I was taught that I was an abandoned child they had picked up, and therefore I had no right to refuse too much. I thought I was just stepping into a cold arranged marriage. I never expected that after countless nights sitting by Charles's hospital bed, after wiping his sweat and massaging his legs that had lost almost all sensation, I would genuinely fall in love with the man. I remember very clearly the nights he ran a high fever. The entire Kensington mansion in Chelsea would be fully lit, but no. One was willing to stay awake with him for long. Only I sat by his bed, continuously changing cold flannels, terrified he wouldn't wake up, yet equally terrified that if he did, he would hate seeing me. Once, in a delirious state, he grabbed my hand and hoarsely called out a name. Eleanor. I heard it clearly, felt the sharp pain clearly, but I didn't pull my hand away. I even leaned down and whispered, I'm here. Don't be afraid. That was the first time I lied to him, and the first time I realized how pathetic I truly was. Later, he actually woke up and recovered. The doctors called it a miracle. His Bach and his Lee's parings Archie, grandparents wept. His parents breathed a sigh of relief. While I stood at the foot of the bed, my hands clasped together so tightly they almost bled. I thought I finally had a small place in his heart, but just 3 months later, Eleanor returned to the UK. She came back looking beautiful, with perfect timing, just like the leading lady in a story where I was merely a clumsy understudy. The day Eleanor went to his company to look for Charles, he was having his first dinner with me since his discharge. I had simmered chicken soup for over 4 hours and learned how to make the baked salmon he had casually mentioned. He liked, but the moment his phone rang and he saw her name, he stood up, immediately leaving only one sentence. I have business. From that day on, he came home less and less. The beautiful Chelsea townhouse, where I had personally picked out the curtains, bought the paintings, and arranged every single teacup, ultimately became just a place where I sat and waited. I used to wait for him until midnight, reheating the food on the table so many times that it dried out. Eventually, he came home to grab some documents, saw me asleep on the sofa, and said, Don't wait up from now on. I don't like being controlled. I sat up and forced a smile, but before I could even say, I was just worried. You'd be hungry. He had already grabbed his files and left. The pregnancy came as a complete surprise. It was a night of heavy rain. Charles came home drunk, held me in the dark, and called out the wrong name. I knew the person he wanted. Wasn't me, but I couldn't bear to push him away. After that night, he vanished for almost a month. When I discovered I was pregnant, my first reaction wasn't joy, but panic. I called him countless times. And finally, the person who answered was Eleanor. She laughed softly, her voice sweet as honey. Amelia, Charles is in the shower. Is there something important? Or is it that you're also pregnant, just like me? That word also pierced my ear like a needle. Later, she publicly announced to everyone that she was carrying Charles's child, framing me as the one who used marriage and pregnancy to force him into taking responsibility. Charles did admit it, but he didn't deny it either. His silence was a blunt knife, slicing slowly but incredibly deep. When I was 6 months pregnant, he handed me a divorce settlement agreement. Black ink on white paper, every word freezing, cold. He would leave the townhouse for me to stay in temporarily until I gave birth, and provide child support if the children were proven to be his. After that, we would have nothing to do with each other's lives. I held that piece of paper, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't clearly see the text. I asked him, Charles, have you ever felt even a tiny bit of affection for me? He looked at me, his eyes completely unwavering. Amelia, you knew exactly what this marriage was. About from the very beginning. I burst out laughing until tears fell onto my pregnant belly. The baby, inside, gave a gentle kick, as if reminding its mother to stop crying. That day, I signed it. Not because I stopped loving him immediately, but because I realized that there are some people to whom you could hand your entire heart on, your knees, and they would still only find it a nuisance. The sound of the hospital room door opening softly pulled me from my memories. I thought it was the nurse returning, so I quickly wiped the tears from the plain corners of my eyes. But the person who walked in was a strange middle-aged man. He wore a gray tailored shirt, black trousers, and his hair was graying at the temples. He looked rushed, as if he had just traveled a very long distance. Seeing me look over, he stopped at the door, his gaze falling on my face, and his eyes suddenly turned red. He opened his mouth a few times before he managed to speak. "Are you Amelia Davies?" My instincts put me on guard. I pulled the blanket up with one hand and placed the other near the nurse call button. "Who are you?" The man seemed to choke at the question. He stepped in slowly, not daring to get too close. He merely placed a file on the bedside table and said, "My name is Edward Harrington. If these results aren't wrong, I am your biological father's younger brother." I stared at the file, my mind blanking for a few seconds. Biological father. Those words were as foreign to me as someone else's story. From childhood, Beatrice Davies had always told me I was picked up at an old abandoned church. Down in Surrey, I was turning blue, and if the Davies family hadn't taken me in, I wouldn't have survived. Whenever I tried to ask more, she would get annoyed. Knowing that is enough. Why ask so many questions? You're an adopted child who constantly wants to dig up your roots. Has this family treated you badly? Over time, I stopped asking. I forced myself to believe I was an abandoned child, lucky to even have a roof over my head to grow up under. Yet now, a stranger was standing before me, claiming to be my biological uncle. I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry. I just asked hoarsely, "Have you got the wrong person?" Edward shook his head vehemently. He pulled out a DNA test result from the file, a faded, yellowed photograph and a copy of a missing persons report for a baby girl from over 20 years ago. The little girl in the photo was chubby, wearing a small silver bracelet on her wrist. The back of the bracelet was engraved with the name Amelia. I stared at the photo for a long time. On my wrist, even now, there was a very faint, small indentation. Beatrice had always claimed, "You got cut by an elastic band when you were little." Edward pointed at the paper, his voice trembling. Your real name is Amelia Harrington. Your father is Richard Harrington, and your mother is Victoria Harrington. You went missing in Cornwall over 20 years ago when you were just a few months old. Our whole family has been looking for you for over 2 decades. I picked up the paper, my eyes stopping at the probability of biological relationship. Those cold numbers made my heart beat so hard it hurt. I wanted to say it was impossible, but my lips moved without making a sound. Seeing me turn pale, Edward panicked. "You've just given birth." I know dropping this on you now is sudden, but I didn't dare delay. Your parents and your brothers are flying down from Edinburgh. They should be at the hospital in about 3 hours. He paused, his eyes tearing up again. An older man standing by my hospital bed, clearly wanting to give me a hug but not daring to, clenching his fists as if terrified of scaring me. I looked at him, feeling both freezing cold and warmly that heated inside. If this was true, then for the past 20-odd years I hadn't been an abandoned child. Someone had looked for me. Someone had remembered my birthday. Someone might have suffered every time they saw a little girl my age on the street. The thought made my throat tighten completely, and tears fell without warning. Edward immediately pulled out a tissue and handed it to me, his voice frantic. "Oh, please don't cry. It's not good for a woman who's just given birth to cry. I'm so clumsy with words. I should have broken it to you more gently," I cried, while letting out a very soft laugh. His clumsy words were nothing like the empty advice I was used to hearing. It was so genuine it made a person's heart melt. Just then, the little girl beside me stirred, her face scrunching up as if about to cry. Edward instantly stood up straight, as tense as if facing a major black crisis. Is the baby uncomfortable? Shall I call a nurse?" I quickly reached out and gently patted my daughter, cooing softly, "It's all right, she's probably just hungry." The little boy also began to wriggle, his tiny hands waving in the air. Edward looked at the twins, his expression a mix of sheer astonishment and deep emotion, like a man who had just found a priceless treasure but didn't dare touch it. He asked very softly, "Amelia, may I take a picture of the 2 little ones? I want to send it to the family. Everyone is so anxious, especially your mother. If she knows you've given birth to 2 such adorable babies, she'll probably flood the airport with her tears." I looked at my children, then at him. For some reason, I couldn't bear to refuse. Perhaps because in this man's eyes there was no calculation, no pity, only a trembling joy that was incredibly awkward but entirely real. I nodded. Edward instantly pulled out his phone. With comically cautious movements, he took a photo from a distance, then asked, "May I step a bit closer?" "I promise not to use the flash." I laughed, my voice still choked. "Yes, you may." He stepped closer, snapping a picture of the two babies lying side by side, one frowning like an old man, the other pursing her lips in deep sleep. After taking the photo, he looked at the screen, unable to hide the curve of his lips. Then he looked up and asked me, "Very seriously, I'm going to send this to the family group chat, but if you're not ready, I won't. Whatever you decide, I'll listen to you first." That single phrase, "I'll listen to you first," made my heart ache sharply. So, this was what it felt like to be respected. I nodded, saying softly, "You can. Send it." Edward immediately sent the photo to the group. Less than 10 seconds. Later, his phone vibrated so incessantly that even I could hear the notification. Chimes clearly. He opened it, reading and laughing like a child. "Your eldest brother is asking whose beautiful babies these are. Your mum just sent a string of exclamation marks. And William, your second brother, is asking if I secretly had kids." That boy really has no filter on his mouth. As he had spoke, he typed a reply. "These are the children of my niece, Amelia Harrington. A pair of twins just born. You lot better prepare your envelopes. The check for my niece better be huge, and the ones for the twins even bigger." I watched him typing furiously, tears still on my face, but I couldn't stop the war, corners of my mouth from turning up. So a family could be this noisy. So a child, born into the world amidst suspicion and neglect, could be welcomed with such frantic, joyful messages. I looked down at my children. The little girl had gone, back to sleep, and the little boy was still clutching my finger, refusing to let go. Out in the corridor, the steady sound of footsteps continued. The hospital was still cold. The surgical pain on my body was still there. The marriage with Charles Kensington hadn't ended yet, but in my heart, a very small corner had just been illuminated. I didn't know what my biological parents looked like. I didn't know if they truly loved me as much as Edward said. I also didn't know if they would feel heartbroken or disappointed when they saw me, a woman who had just given birth, abandoned by her husband. But at least in this moment, I suddenly had a bit of courage to believe that my life wasn't just confined to that cold townhouse in Chelsea, not just subjected Ellenly to Charles Kensington's indifferent gaze, and certainly not just defined by years of bowing my head to the Davies family. Edward was about to say something else when his phone rang again. He glanced at the screen, hurriedly answered, and his voice suddenly choked up. "Victoria? Yes, I've met her. It really is Amelia. Yes. She just gave birth. She's still very weak. Please don't cry. If you cry when you get here, you'll make her cry." 2. I didn't know what the person on the other end said, but I saw Edward's eyes turn even redder. He turned to look at me, holding out the phone. His lips trembling. "Your mother wants to hear your voice for a moment. If you're not ready, it's okay." I stared at the phone, my heart pounding wildly. My hand was still weak, but I slowly reached out and took it. The other end of the line was silent for a few seconds before a woman's sobbing voice rang out, so incredibly gentle it almost made me break down. "Amelia, are you my Amelia?" The woman's voice trembled so much that just hearing the name Amelia made my heart feel as if it were being squeezed. I thought that no one in this world would ever call my name with a voice so full of joy and agony. From childhood, Beatrice Davies called me Amelia, mostly to order me around, to remind me to yield to Eleanor, or to scold me for being ungrateful. As for Charles, he rarely called me by my full name. When he was angry, he coldly called me Amelia Davies. When he was indifferent, he just threw out the word, "you." Yet the woman on the other end only said my name once, and I felt my entire being soften unbearably. I held the phone with a shaking hand, tears dropping onto the pillow, my voice incredibly hoarse. "Yes, I'm here." The other end immediately let out a small sob, as if she had tried to hold it in for a long time but ultimately failed. She said, "It's Mum, it's Victoria. Don't be afraid, Mummy is coming to you. Just lie still, don't cry too much. You've just given birth, crying isn't good. For you, darling. I didn't know how to answer. The word mum choked in my throat, both unfamiliar and desperately longed for, like standing outside a brightly lit house but not daring to step in for fear of having the wrong address. I looked at Edward and saw him turn his face away to wipe his eyes, looking awkwardly pitiful. The person on the phone softened her voice further. Amelia, I know this is too sudden. You don't have to call me mum right away. You just need to know that your father, your brothers, and I are on our way. All these years, our family hasn't stopped looking for you for a single day. That last sentence made me cry out loud. I bit my lip hard to avoid startling the babies, but the tears kept falling. I had always told myself I was a discarded child. I was lucky the Davies family raised me, so I had to be grateful, be obedient, and endure. But it turned out that somewhere out there were people who hadn't discarded me. They just hadn't found me yet. Fearing I was getting too emotional, Edward quickly took the phone back and urged his sister-in-law to calm down. He told my mother that I had just given birth, that I was weak, and that the twins needed rest. After hanging up, he stood awkwardly by the bed like a man who had just become an uncle for the first time. He looked at the water jug, the tissue box, the twins, and finally asked me, "Are you thirsty? Shall I pour you some water?" Wait, are women who just gave birth allowed to drink cold water? Should I call the nurse? I watched his clumsiness and couldn't help but smile. The smile tugged at my eyelid, surgical wound, making me wince, but my heart felt a bit warmer. Please sit down, uncle. I'm fine. He nodded and sat down on the chair beside the bed, but his back remained rigidly straight, his hands placed formally on his knees, as if the person on the bed wasn't a lost niece but a fragile, priceless porcelain vase that might shatter if he breathed too heavily. Over 2 hours later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor. It wasn't the loud, intrusive steps of nosy onlookers, but the sound of many people trying to walk quickly while being terrified of disturbing someone. Edward jumped to his feet. He looked at me, lowering his voice. They must be here. I unconsciously gripped the edge of the blanket, my heart beating faster than. When I went into the delivery room, I had imagined my biological parents so many times. Sometimes I thought they were too poor to raise me. Sometimes I thought they had forgotten me long ago. Sometimes during those days at the Davies household when I was scolded to tears, I secretly wished someone would appear and say, "Amelia, you don't belong here, Mummy is taking you home." But when the moment actually arrived, I was scared. I was afraid that seeing me, so pale, abandoned by my husband right after giving birth, they would be disappointed because the daughter they had found wasn't as radiant as they had imagined. The hospital door was pushed open very gently. The first person to enter was a woman wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat, her hair pinned in a low chignon at the nape of her neck. Her face was elegant, but pale from the rush. She stood at the door looking at me, her entire body freezing, her gaze locking onto my face. In just that single moment, I understood why people say blood ties are a very strange thing. I had never met her, but looking into those eyes, my heart ached as if an old wound had been touched. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle a sob, then walked forward, slowly, every step incredibly light, as if afraid I would vanish. "Edward," whispered beside her. "Victoria, this is Amelia." The woman nodded, but her eyes never left me. She stopped by the bed, reaching out a trembling hand, yet not daring to touch me immediately. Finally, she only asked in a hoarse voice, "My Amelia?" I looked at her, and the tears that had just stopped flowed out again. I couldn't answer, I just gave a single nod. That slight nod made Victoria almost collapse. She sat by the bed, both hands cupping my hand, her movements so careful, as if afraid of hurting me. Her hands were warm and soft, completely contrasting the coldness I had endured for days. She leaned down and kissed the bottom/1 back of my hand, tears falling drop by drop onto my skin. "I'm sorry. Mummy took too long to find you. I let you suffer." Hearing that, my whole body trembled. No one in the Davies family had ever apologized to me like that. They always reminded me to be grateful, to be sensible, to think of Eleanor. Charles had never given me a proper apology, either. Yet my biological mother, whom I was meeting for the first time, was apologizing for letting me suffer, as if all my years of feeling lost were her fault. Behind Victoria, a middle-aged man walked in. He wore a dark-tailored suit, tall with a stern face, someone you instantly knew was more used to giving orders than explaining himself. But when his eyes landed on me, that hard exterior shattered instantly. He stood still for a few seconds, his throat bobbing, before walking over slowly. Edward softly introduced him. "This is your father, Richard Harrington." I looked at the man and, for some reason, felt a little intimidated. Perhaps because I had never truly been protected by a father. Arthur Davies had raised me, but his affection was always conditional. If Eleanor cried, I was definitely the one at fault. If there were guests, I had to stand obediently in the background and not embarrass the Davies family. The man before me was different. He didn't say much. He just looked down at me, for a long time, his eyes reddening, before he said hoarsely, "Dad is late. Amelia." Just those few words were enough to break my defenses. I used to think that if I met my real father, I would ask so many questions. Why did he lose me? Why did it take so long to find me? Why did I have to live in someone else's house for over 20 years? But when he stood before me and said, "Dad is late," all the questions dissolved. I only felt an overwhelming sense of grievance, the grievances suppressed for so many years, from the time I was a child forced to give up my doll to Eleanor, to the time I became a wife waiting in a cold townhouse. It all surged up at once. I cried until my shoulders shook. Victoria quickly pulled me into a gentle embrace, murmuring continuously, "Cry anymore. Mummy is here. Mum and Dad are both here." Richard stood beside us. His hands clenched so tightly his veins bulged, but his voice was very low. "Don't let her cry too much, she's just given birth." At that moment, the three young men standing outside finally walked in one by one. The first, in his early 30s, wore a crisp white shirt. He exuded calm, wearing thin-rimmed glasses, clearly a man who spoke with logic and precision. He looked at me, trying to maintain his composure, but the corners of his eyes were red. Edward patted his shoulder and told me, "This is your eldest brother, Oliver Harrington. He's a barrister with his own chambers in London. From now on, if anyone bullies you, hand any legal disputes over to him." Oliver stepped forward, bowing slightly, his voice warm but firm. "Hello, Amelia. I'm Oliver. From today onwards, whatever requires reasoning or the law, leave it to me." I looked at him and, for some unknown reason, felt a profound sense of security. Perhaps because there were no flashy promises in his voice, only the certainty of someone who would truly stand in front of me if the sky were falling. The second man to enter was a bit taller, with a tanned complexion, short hair, and a strict, sharp gaze. He wore a simple polo shirt but stood ramrod straight, possessing an aura that unconsciously deterred anyone from lying. Edward introduced him. "This is your second brother, William. He's a detective. Inspector at Scotland Yard, specializing in economic crimes, but for years he's thrown himself into missing children cases like a madman. And, well, he truly is family." William looked at me, looking so stern I felt a bit tense, but the first thing he said was incredibly clumsy. Don't be afraid, I don't interrogate family members." Edward chuckled. Victoria glared at her son through her tears. "Your sister just gave birth and you're speaking to her like you're questioning a suspect?" William pursed his lips, his ears turning slightly red, and seriously added, "I mean, if anyone harms you, I'll deal with them by the book. I won't let you be wronged anymore." The last person walked in, shattering the emotional atmosphere with a wildly inappropriate comment. "All right, are you two done with your deep acting? It's time for the long-lost sister to meet the most handsome brother in the house." He was around 28, wearing a trendy jacket, his hair styled neatly, and a smile so bright it made the hospital room feel less cold. He approached, raising his hands to introduce himself. "I'm Julian, your third brother. I work in media, TV production, and I'm brilliant at crisis PR. If you want to be famous later, I guarantee I can make you shine brighter than Miss World." Before he could finish, three voices rang out simultaneously. Richard, Oliver, and William said in unison, "Shut up." Julian froze, looking deeply wronged. Why is this family so weird? My lost sister just came home. Can't I show off my professional skills a bit? Victoria was so annoyed she laughed, wiping her tears while scolding him. Your sister just had a baby, and you want to drag her into showbiz? Your mouth was truly born to raise your father's blood pressure. I couldn't hold back and burst into laughter. The surgical wound pulled sharply, and I winced immediately. The whole family panicked. My mother rushed to support my back. My father frowned and reached for the call button. Oliver checked the IV drip. William turned to the door, ready to hunt down a doctor. And Julian raised both hands in surrender. All right, my fault. From now on, I am only in charge of making my sister happy, not making her hurt. That comment softened the mood in the room. I looked at them gathered around. To me, each so different. One stern, one clumsy, one loud, but all looking at me with careful, loving eyes. In that moment, I felt like someone who had been lost for a very long time, finally hearing their family calling their name in the dark. The twins woke up just as the room settled into silence. The boy frowned and cried first, and the girl chimed in. The sound of newborn cries made the three brothers freeze instantly. Julian looked at the babies, his eyes lighting up. Good Lord, my nephew and niece are this adorable? He tilted his head, observing seriously, then concluded, this one looks like my sister. And that one also looks like my sister. Thank God. Oliver shot him a glance. Can you be quiet for 3 minutes? Julian fired. Back, I can't promise, but for my nephew and niece, I'll try. Victoria, awkwardly but incredibly carefully, picked up the little girl, asking the nurse how to support her head. Richard stood by the boy, wanting to touch him, but afraid to. Eventually just using the tip of his finger to gently touch the baby's foot. When the baby curled his legs, Richard snatched his hand back as if he had just committed a grave error. I watched the scene, feeling a bittersweet warmth in my heart. My 2 children had been forgotten by their biological father the moment they were born, but it turned out there was a whole other family clumsily learning how to love them. My mother sat beside me, cooing to the baby while looking at me. She whispered, Amelia, you don't have to accept us immediately. You can call us whatever you wanna. Like, you can come home whenever you want. I only ask that you don't force yourself to bear everything alone anymore. I lowered my eyes, my hand unconsciously stroking the blanket. I wanted to call her mum, but my throat tightened not because I didn't want to, but because that word was so precious I feared that if I said it, everything would turn out to be a dream. Understanding this, she didn't push. She merely held my hand, her thumb gently stroking the back of my hand like comforting a child. It's all right, take your time, darling. It was exactly this lack of pressure that made me want to cry even more. Before, everyone wanted me to be sensible immediately, forgive immediately, yield immediately. Only my biological mother, having just found me, told me to take my time. While the hospital room gradually warmed up, somewhere else in London, Charles Kensington was sitting in the boardroom on the top floor of Kensington Holdings. The meeting had dragged on for over 40 minutes, the atmosphere so tense that none of the department heads dared to breathe too loudly. He stared at the revenue charts on the screen, but his eyes kept dropping to the phone placed face down beside him. No calls, no messages from Amelia. In the past, no matter how cold he was, she would still text to ask if he had eaten dinner, if he had a headache, when he was coming home. Today, she had just given birth. By all rights, she should be calling him, crying, blaming him, or at least asking if he wanted to see the children. But the phone was so silent it infuriated him. Henry Sterling, standing beside him, observed his friend's expression, and I finally couldn't hold back. Once the meeting ended and they were back in his carpery, private office, Henry said, Charles, maybe you should make a trip to the hospital. Regardless of everything, your wife just gave birth to your children. Charles loosened his tie and threw a file onto the desk, his voice icy. She insisted on having them. She can take responsibility for them herself. Henry frowned. Don't you think that's a bit too far? Those twins are yours. 2. Charles stayed silent for a few seconds, then sneered. Are you sure? We signed a divorce agreement a long time ago. What was her motive for keeping the pregnancy? She knows best. Henry looked at him as if looking at a stranger. There were things he had wanted to say for a long time, but out of friendship, he had swallowed them. Today, he didn't hold back. When you were lying paralyzed, the person who cared for you was her. The person who signed your surgery consent forms was her. The person who stayed up all night nursing you, even while your family gossiped about her, was her. You can choose not to love her, but don't speak as if she owes you something. Charles looked up, his eyes turning cold. Are you lecturing me, Henry? Henry exhaled, his voice slowing down. I'm not lecturing you. I'm just afraid there will come a day when you regret it, and it'll be too late. The office fell silent. Charles picked up his phone and unlocked the screen. Still no messages. Amelia's silence felt like something completely outside his calculations. He had always thought she would be there forever, like the townhouse in Chelsea, like the cold dinners on the table, like the lamp left on whenever he came home. Late. He never thought there would be a day when she truly stopped calling. But he quickly suppressed the rising discomfort. He told himself it was merely an unfamiliar feeling when someone who had always revolved around him suddenly stopped. Back at the hospital, my eldest brother Oliver had asked thoroughly about the, quote, legal status of my marriage to Charles. I told him we had signed a divorce settlement, but hadn't yet formalized it through the solicitors and the courts. Hearing that Charles was downstairs taking Eleanor for a pregnancy scan while I was giving birth, my father's face darkened instantly. My second brother, William, stood by the window, his fists clenched, his voice very low. That bastard is in this hospital. Julian immediately rolled up his sleeves. William calmly added, assaulting someone in a hospital isn't a good look. Let me call the press to get a better camera angle. Oliver shot him an icy glare. If you say one more word, I'll throw you out into the corridor. Julian immediately shut his mouth but muttered, I was just trying to create a bit of family bonding. I looked at them, feeling both amused and teary-eyed, but I quickly stated my decision. I want to finalize the divorce before making my true identity public. The room fell silent. My mother looked at me for a long time, her eyes filled with heartache. My father frowned, clearly unwilling to let his newly found daughter suffer any more grievances. William was the quickest to react. Why hide it? The Kensington family bullies. You and the Davies family's hands aren't clean. If we go public, no one would dare call you the other woman anymore. I knew he was right, but I shook my head. If they find out I'm a Harrington right now, Charles might refuse to finalize the divorce. Or if he does, I won't know if he's letting me go because he truly wants to, or because he's afraid of offending the Harrington family. I want to end this under my current identity as Amelia Davies, not under the mimate shadow of our family. Hearing this, my mother's eyes reddened. She didn't advise me to reconsider, nor did she scold me for being stubborn. She just held my hand tighter and whispered, all right, then I will be your friend first. In front of outsiders, I won't claim you, but behind your back, you must remember Mum is always here. My father remained silent for a moment before nodding. He said, Oliver, prepare the divorce papers for your sister. William, quietly look into what happened back then. Julian, monitor public opinion. Don't let anyone smear your sister's name. 3 concise sentences, and the hospital room instantly felt like an impenetrable fortress had been erected around me. I lay on the bed, the twins beside me, suddenly realizing my spine no longer felt cold. Out there, Charles Kensington still didn't know that from today onwards, the woman he thought only knew how to wait for him to turn around had finally found a place to call home. On the day I was discharged, London saw a brief, sharp downpour. The rain wasn't heavy enough to flood the streets, nor enough to break the stifling late November gloom, but it covered the car windows in a misty layer of condensation. I sat in the back seat, wrapped in a thick cashmere scarf my mother had personally pulled up to my neck. Beside me, the 2 newborn car seats were securely fastened. The baby boy was fast asleep, his mouth occasionally twitching as if dreaming of milk. The baby girl was a bit more fussy, frowning. The moment we got in the car, her tiny hands balled into fists, as if displeased at being moved from her warm hospital cot. My mother sat next to me, one hand steadying the car seat, the other on my clothes in the seated or my loda shoulder, softly reminding me, don't stare out at the rain too long, you'll catch a chill so soon after the birth. If you're tired, lean on my shoulder and sleep for a bit. Hearing the word mum in my heart, I could only reply aloud, very softly, yes, Aunt Victoria. My mother paused for a second, but quickly smiled as if nothing was wrong. I knew it pained her, and it pained me too. But this was the plan we had agreed upon. Until the divorce was finalized, I couldn't let the Kensingtons know my true identity. I had lived for over 3 years in a marriage where every emotion was ambiguous. I didn't want the very end of it to be clouded by suspicion over whether I was being freed out of love or out of profit. My mother understood this, so she accepted playing the role of an older friend or aunt. Even though every time I called her aunt, her eyes darkened a little. The car stopped outside the Chelsea townhouse just before noon. The housekeeper had been informed in advance and hurried to open the gates, helping the clams 21. Maternity nurse carried the babies inside first. I stepped out of the car very slowly. The post-surgery pain made every step heavy, like walking on a tightrope, where the slightest misstep sent a chilling shock through my entire body. My mother immediately supported my elbow, her tone so strict it sounded like an exam. Order, walk slowly, nobody is chasing you. I let out a soft laugh, but my throat tightened. I was used to doing everything myself, enduring pain, pretending to be fine so as not to bother anyone. Now, just because I walked a little too fast, someone was frowning and scolding me as if it were a major crisis. The townhouse looked exactly as it did the day I left to give birth. Spotless, quiet, and so vast that even my footsteps sounded lonely. The living room was decorated in cream and taupe. The sofa was the one I chose after the wedding because Charles was still in rehab, and the doctors had warned that overly soft chairs were bad for his back. The painting on the wall was a seascape of Cornwall. I bought it because I heard him say he loved the sea as a child. The bookshelf near the window held business books he never read, and the money tree by the stairs was the one I repotted 3 times because I was terrified it would die. I used to think that as long as I nurtured every little corner, this house would eventually gain some warmth. But looking at it now, everything remained exactly the same. The only thing that had changed was the person who once poured her faith into it. Victoria looked around, her gaze stopping on the wedding photo on the console table. In the photo, I wore a white gown, standing next to Charles, who was in a wheelchair. He was thinner then, his face still pale from the crash, looking straight at the camera with an expression that lacked affection but wasn't entirely cold either. As for me in the photo, I had a gentle smile, my eyes shining with a foolish hope that even I now pitied. My mother stepped forward, intending to turn the frame face down, but paused. She turned and asked, "Do you want to keep this?" I stared at the photo for a few seconds, then shook my head. "Please ask someone to put it away. Don't throw it out. It's still a part of my life, but I don't want to see it every day anymore." She didn't say another word, simply handing the frame gently to the housekeeper and instructing her to box it up. The way she respected even my pain made my eyes sting. The maternity nurse had taken the babies up to the nursery. That room was the one I had prepared during my 4th month of pregnancy. When the doctor mentioned a high probability of twins, I picked out pale yellow wallpaper, placed 2 cots side by side, and hung cloud and moon mobiles above them. Back then, I was still foolish enough to take a picture and send it to Charles, asking if it looked nice. He never replied. 3 days later, I saw Eleanor post a picture of a high-end baby boutique on Instagram with the caption, "Someone said our baby deserves only the best." I stared at those words for a long time, before quietly deleting the nursery photo from my chat with him. Now, my 2 children were actually sleeping in this room, but their father hadn't stepped inside to look at them even once. My mother helped me to the master bedroom. The spacious room had double-layered beige curtains and a large bed in the center. On the dressing table sat a bottle of perfume I had bought because Charles once said white floral scents were too strong. I used it exactly 3 times and never again. His old suit jacket still hung in the wardrobe, the one he wore on his first day back at the office after his recovery. That day, I woke up at 5 a.m. to iron it, match his tie, and make him porridge from scratch because I feared he wouldn't be used to eating out. Yet, he took the jacket and tie but didn't touch the porridge. He said the driver was waiting and left straight away. That bowl of porridge sat on the table until noon, going stone cold. I still remember clearly how I sat down and ate the whole bowl, comforting myself that His mood was just unstable after his recovery, and that I needed to be more patient. Sit down first, don't stand for too long. My mother pulled me from my memories. With a very gentle voice, she helped me onto the bed, propped pillows behind my lust back, and checked the air conditioning. Finding it a bit too cool, she immediately adjusted the temperature, then turned to ask the housekeeper to bring up warm water and ginger tea. Watching her walk back and forth in the laundry room, I naturally felt my heart soften. In the Davies household, Beatrice used to care for Eleanor just like this whenever she had a stomachache or a cold. As for me, if I was sick, I was usually just shoved a pill and told, "You're old. Enough, take it yourself." Back then, I thought it was because I wasn't their biological child that I wasn't loved as much. Only later did I understand that not all mothers in the pliant time world are so stingy with their affection. As I was drinking the warm water, my phone buzzed. The screen displayed Charles Kensington's name. I stared at the name for a few seconds, strangely realizing my heart wasn't racing like before. In the past, whenever he called, even if I was asleep, I would wake up instantly. Even if I was angry, I would rush to answer, terrified of missing something important. Now, I just felt tired. I pressed answer, and before I could speak, his cold voice came through. "You've been discharged," I replied, "yes." He fell silent for a few seconds, perhaps, unaccustomed to my short answer. Then he continued, "The housekeeper informed me. You're back at the house. How are the twins?" The question came far too late, but it still caused a slight pang in my chest. I glanced toward the nursery, my voice calm. "Fine, they're very good." Silence. Again on his end. I thought he might ask a few more questions. Were they boys or girls? How much did they weigh? Did they look like anyone? What did the doctors say? But finally, he just said, "I'm busy right now. We'll talk tonight." Holding the phone, I suddenly found it laughable that I was still expecting the phone. Bare minimum of decency. Before he could hang up, I spoke up. "Charles, let's go and finalize the divorce tomorrow." The air on the other side seemed to freeze. I heard the faint rustle of papers turning, then his voice dropped. "You're in. Such a rush, and you've only just been discharged?" I looked at my hand, where the IV needle had left a small bruise, and spoke. Slowly, the agreement was signed when I was 6 months pregnant. Dragging it out has no meaning. He let out a cold laugh. "Amelia, what kind of game are you playing now? If it were in the past, that sentence would surely have made me cry. I would have explained immediately, said I wasn't playing games, and feared he'd misunderstand. But right now, I only found him to be incredibly distant, I wondered why I had ever loved this man so much. I looked straight ahead, my voice not loud but every word distinct. "Charles, you're overthinking it. I want a divorce not to make you turn around. I want you out of my life, legally and permanently." The room was dead silent. Outside the window, the lingering rain dripped from the eaves. Charles remained silent for a long time, as if realizing for the first time that the woman on the other end was no longer the Amelia he knew. He might be used to a wife who was gentle, submissive, and always bowing her head, but he wasn't used to me like this. A woman who had just given birth, pale as paper, smelling of milk and antiseptic, calmly telling him to get out of her life. Finally, he laughed coldly. "Fine, I'll take you tomorrow." After saying that, he hung up. The screen went dark and I realized my hand was shaking. Not because I was still in love, but because even when someone desperately wants to step out of their misery, the moment of truly turning one's back still requires a massive amount of strength. My mother immediately pushed the door open. She must have been standing outside, listening to almost everything. She didn't ask if it hurt. That question would have been redundant. She just walked over, placed a warm bowl of soup in my slosh hands, and said in a very normal tone, "Drink up. Getting a divorce requires energy. You need to be clear-headed to sign those papers beautifully." I froze for a second, then burst out laughing. Victoria Harrington truly was a strange woman. Her words were intensely practical, slightly humorous, and managed to pull me right out of my heavy feelings. I quickly lowered my head and drank. The soup, the hot liquid sliding down my throat, warmed my heart. Across the city, Charles sat in the Kensington Holdings office, phone still in hand. The screen was dark, but my phrase, "I want you out of my life," kept looping in his head. He had assumed I called to complain, to beg him tearfully, to come home and look at his children, or to bring up Eleanor. He had even prepared a few cold remarks to shut me down. But I didn't ask where he was. I didn't mention Eleanor, and I didn't bring up the children needing a father. I only demanded a divorce. That irritated him more than anything. Henry walked in with some documents, took one look at his face, and guessed. "Your wife called?" Charles replied coldly. "Don't call her that. We're getting divorced." Henry put the documents down, looked at him for a moment, and said, "If you're getting divorced, why are you so agitated?" Charles looked up, his eyes turning icy. Henry didn't back down. He knew Charles's personality, arrogant, stubborn, and once he made up his mind, very difficult to turn back. But he had also witnessed Amelia in the rehab clinic, crying uncontrollably just because Charles managed to move a single finger. For a woman like that to be abandoned while giving birth, even an endlessly preens atries, outsider found it cruel. Henry sighed. "Don't wait until she's truly gone to realize you've grown used to having someone wait up for you. No one in this world is obligated to stand in the same spot forever." Charles gave a cold laugh, pressing his pen hard onto the document. "She won't go anywhere. She won't be able to bear it." But the moment the words left his mouth, he felt a hollow emptiness inside, because my voice on the phone didn't sound like someone who couldn't bear to leave. Sounded like someone who had heard enough, tired enough, and finally truly let go. That evening, around 9 p.m., the sound of a car echoed outside the townhouse gates. I had just finished feeding the twins and was so exhausted I only wanted to sleep. My mother was helping me pull up the duvet when the housekeeper knocked, announcing that Mr. Kensington had returned. I froze for a second, then nodded. My mother looked at me, clearly worried. I knew she wanted to stay, but I gave a very slight shake of my head. There were a few things between Charles and me that I had to state clearly myself. Not out of hope, but because I didn't want to always be a passive player in my own life. My mother understood, but was still uneasy. Before leaving, she placed my phone right next to my hand and whispered, "Call me if anything happens." "I'm right." Outside, I nodded, silently calling her mum in my heart. Charles pushed the door open and walked in. He was wearing a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, carrying a very faint scent of perfume that I knew wasn't his. He had probably just come from Eleanor's. Thinking of this, my heart longer felt that sharp, piercing ache. There was only a very distant, cold detachment. He stood at the door looking at me. I was wearing loose maternity clothes, my hair tied back loosely, my face still pale, but in my arms I held a tiny baby, while the other slept soundly in the cot by the bed. His gaze lingered on the two infants much longer than I expected. For a very brief moment, the coldness on his face seemed to crack. But it was only for a moment. He then looked at me, his familiar voice ringing out. "Do you really have to push things this far?" I didn't know if he was asking about the divorce or about my failure to call him to the hospital, but whichever it was, I had no desire to guess anymore. I placed the baby back into the cot, my movements slow so as not to wake her. Then, I sat up straight and looked at him. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I want to go to the solicitor's office to sign the final consent order." Charles frowned. "You just gave birth. Can't you rest for a few days?" I smiled, very faintly. "When I was giving birth, you didn't seem to care that I was giving birth." That sentence made his face harden. He looked at me, his eyes a bit more complex, but quickly shifting back to mockery. "Before, you cried and refused to sign. Now you're so eager. Amelia, are you trying to use this to force me to turn back?" If it had been before, that question would have broken me. But now, I only found that him incredibly alien. So alien, I wondered why I had ever loved this man so much. I looked straight into his eyes, my voice quiet but distinct. "Charles, I think too highly of yourself. I want a divorce not to make you turn back, but because I want you to vanish from my life entirely." The room was dead quiet. Outside the window, drops from the lingering rain fell. From the eaves. Charles stared at me for a long time. Finally, he laughed, coldly, turned, and walked toward the door. "Fine, I'll take you tomorrow." He left the room, but his footsteps lacked the decisiveness they had when he entered. When the door clicked shut, I realized my hands were trembling. My mother immediately pushed the door open. She walked over, pulled the duvet up for me, and looked down at the two babies in the cot. The baby girl was fast asleep. The baby boy frowned slightly, as if dreaming of something unpleasant. My mother gently stroked my hair, her voice very low. "You did brilliantly." Just those 3 words almost brought me to tears. I looked up at her, forcing a smile. "Tomorrow will probably be exhausting." She smiled back, but her eyes were sharp. "Don't worry, I'm going with you. If he tries any tricks, I'll show him that a woman who just gave birth isn't as easy to bully as he thinks." That night, Charles didn't return to the master bedroom. He stayed in his study, just like the previous 3 years. The only difference was that this time I wasn't lying awake waiting for his footsteps. I fed the twins, changed their nappies, listened to my mother hum lullabies to her grandchildren, and heard the maternity nurse chuckle at how terrified my mother was of holding them too tightly. The next morning, I woke to the baby girls fussing. The post-surgery pain was still there, a dull, relentless reminder that my body had just fought a massive battle. Yet, strangely, my heart didn't feel as heavy as the night before. I lay still for a few seconds, looking at the cream ceiling, hearing the rain stop, outside the window, and listening to my mother softly coaxing the baby. She held her so carefully, her body a bit stiff because she wasn't used to it, whispering, There, let your mummy sleep a little longer. If you're a good girl, Granny will buy you toys. If you're not, Granny will still buy them, but I'll scold you lovingly while I do." I almost burst out laughing. Having just found her daughter, she had immediately taken to being a grandmother in her own unique way, awkward, yet so tender it melted the heart. I propped myself up to sit. My mother turned, her gaze instantly turning strict. "You mustn't sit up like that. Do you think you've just come back from the supermarket?" I was gently scolded, but I felt warm inside. The nurse brought the baby boy over, and I fed them both. My mother stood beside me, adjusting my blankets, checking my hands and feet as if inspecting a fragile artifact. Outside, the sound of a car engine pulling into the driveway coincided with me putting the close-to-tease babies back in their cots. The housekeeper knocked, announcing that Mr. Charles had the car ready and was waiting downstairs. Hearing this, my mother's face turned icy, but her voice remained gentle when speaking to me. "If you're tired, we can delay." I shook my head. "No more delays, Aunt Victoria. I'll only be able to rest once this is done today." I still had to call her aunt, but she just nodded and wrapped another scarf around my neck. "All right, let's go. But remember, the divorce papers can wait. Your legs must move slowly." I walked down the stairs, step by step. Charles stood in the living room wearing a crisp white shirt, a black suit jacket draped over his arm, looking immaculately neat, more like he was going to a board meeting than ending a marriage. He looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my pale face, stopping on the thick scarf my mother had wrapped around me. "Do you really need to dress that heavily? London isn't freezing." The moment he finished speaking, my mother leveled him with a lukewarm stare. "A woman who has just given birth is most vulnerable to the cold. If you don't know that, keep your opinions to yourself." The remark was quiet, but it slapped harder than a shout. Charles frowned, clearly unaccustomed to a stranger speaking to him like that in his own home. He looked at my mother for a few seconds and asked, "Are you really just a friend of Amelia's?" Before I could answer, my mother smiled. "An older friend, yes. I'm fond enough of her to look after her for a few days." "Surely you don't have a problem with that?" The tension in the room hitched. I saw the suspicion in Charles's eyes, but perhaps he was in a rush and didn't want to argue before heading to the grading solicitor's office. He turned away coldly. The black Mercedes was parked outside. I sat in the back with my mother, while Charles sat in the passenger seat. No one spoke during the journey. The morning the city was bustling. Cars queued at every junction. Commuters rushed with their umbrellas, and everything outside was utterly normal. While I was on my way to sign the final full stop on my 3-year marriage, I looked at my hands resting on my knees. My ring finger still bore the faint indentation of my wedding band. I had taken it off last night and put it in the drawer of my dressing table. The ring wasn't heavy, but only after removing it did I realize that for years, I had worn it at the expense of all my self-respect. The solicitor's office was situated on a quiet street in Mayfair. Charles got out of the car first, walking briskly out of habit. My mother immediately helped me out, adjusting my scarf and muttering, "Don't look at him. It's normal for a bugged, healthy person to walk ahead, but someone with good breeding knows to turn back and help a new mother." I heard her and felt both amused and teary-eyed. Charles clearly heard her too. His steps faltered slightly, but he didn't turn back. I didn't call out to him. In the past, I was terrified of these distances, terrified of walking too slowly and being left behind. Now I understood that someone who truly wants to wait for you will naturally turn back, and for someone who doesn't, shouting until your throat is hoarse is useless. The initial paperwork went fairly quickly, and my part was done. It was Charles's turn. The solicitor pointed to the final page for him to sign the financial consent order. Charles had just touched pen to paper when the phone in. His pocket buzzed, the screen lit up, and Eleanor's name was clearly visible. I saw it, and my mother saw it. Charles frowned, picked up the phone, and stood up. "Excuse me, maman." He walked out into the corridor. I sat quietly in my chair. The soundproofing on. The glass door wasn't great, and his voice drifted in intermittently. I didn't catch everything, only the words. Stomach ache, hospital, don't cry. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip tight and warm. I knew she was holding herself back. A moment later, Charles returned. His face was no longer as calm as before. His gaze swept past me and landed on the file on the desk. I looked at him, not asking who called or what happened. My silence seemed to throw him off. He said, "Eleanor isn't feeling well. I have to go to the Prenatal hospital." I stared at the pen left on the desk, asking very softly, "Can't you just sign it and then go?" The question wasn't loud, but the small office fell completely silent. Charles pursed his lips. "She's having severe abdominal pain. The baby might be in danger." I looked at him, suddenly feeling that my past 3 years had been a massive joke. I had just given birth to 2 of his children a few days ago. I was sitting here, so weak that walking a few steps made me break out in a cold sweat. Yet, in his eyes, Eleanor's pain was always more urgent, more pitiable, more in need of him. I nodded, my voice so calm it even surprised me. "Then go." Charles looked at me, seemingly shocked that I didn't throw a fit. He picked up his suit jacket, turned, and walked out. My mother instantly sprang to her feet and chased him to the door, her voice echoing clearly down the corridor. "Charles Kensington, are you an animal? Would it kill you to sign one name before you leave? A woman who just birthed twins for you is sitting right there, and what kind of man are you?" Heads turned in the corridor. My face flushed, not from embarrassment, but because for the first time someone was screaming the words I had never dared to say on my behalf. Charles stopped, his face looking awful. He turned to look at my mother. "This is between Amelia and me. You have no right to interfere." My mother sneered. "Right? You abandon a postpartum woman here to run after another woman, and you think strangers on the street don't have the right to swear at you? I'm standing here speaking decently only out of respect for those 2 babies." Charles didn't reply, or perhaps didn't want to reply in front of an audience. He walked briskly out the door, leaving behind the cold silhouette I used to know so well. But today, as that silhouette vanished, I felt a part of my heart finally switch off entirely. My mother wasn't ready to give up. She ran out into the street, just in time to see Charles's Mercedes pull away. She immediately flagged down a black cab that had just dropped off a passenger. The driver rolled down the window, and before he could speak, my mother said sharply, "Follow that black Mercedes. Catch it, and I'll pay you £10,000. The cabbie stared at her, eyes wide, probably thinking it was a scam. My mother whipped out her phone and instantly transferred a massive deposit into his account. The screen flashed, successful in less than 3 seconds. The driver's face flipped from annoyance to the enthusiasm of an F1 racer. "Get in, madam. I'll floor it." I heard the solicitor in the office cough lightly, likely stifling a laugh, and I, after a morning I thought would only bring heartache, let out a soft laugh. My mother truly had a way of making you want to cry and laugh at the same time. But a black cab couldn't catch Charles's Mercedes in London traffic. Almost 20 minutes later, my mother returned, her hair slightly messy, her face still furious, but her eyes softening the moment she saw me, still waiting in the Parthen chair. She walked over quickly, took my hand, and said apologetically, Aunt. Victoria is sorry. I couldn't drag him back. I shook my head. It's all right, Aunt Victoria. Hearing me correct the title, her lips pressed together, slightly. I knew she had almost called herself Mum, and I knew how incredibly hard it was for her to hold it in. The cab driver followed behind, his voice much quieter. Sorry, ma'am, that car was too fast. I couldn't get him. About the money, my mother turned, transferred the rest of the promised amount, and said, You tried. Now take us. Back to Chelsea. The driver's eyes lit up as he thanked her repeatedly while I looked down, hiding a smile behind my hand. In the middle of my chaotic life, my mother's hot-tempered generosity was like a spicy ginger, sweet, warming my inner. Kissed. On the ride back, I leaned against the back seat, utterly exhausted. The divorce papers still lacked the final signature. I should have been furious, resentful, but the emotion inside me was frighteningly hollow. My mother sat beside me, not asking if I was sad. She just adjusted my scarf and muttered to herself, It doesn't matter. A man can run once, but he can't run forever. We have the paperwork, we have the solicitor, we have witnesses. Does he think divorce is a game he can play whenever he fancies? I looked at her and said softly, Aunt Victoria, I'm a bit tired. Just that simple phrase made her eyes redden. She put an arm around my shoulder, letting my head rest against her, her voice softening completely. If you're tired, sleep for a bit. I'll wake you when we get home. From now on, if you're tired, say so. If you're in pain, say so. You don't need to force yourself anymore. When we got back to the townhouse, the maternity nurse was waiting in the living room, holding the baby boy. The moment he saw me, he opened his eyes, his tiny hands reaching out as if he truly recognized his mother. My heart melted. Instantly, I took him into my arms and kissed his forehead. The smell of newborn milk and baby powder soothed the morning's grievances. He wriggled and rooted against my chest, clearly hungry. My mother immediately started issuing orders to the staff to prepare the room, warm water, and clean towels. As she helped me upstairs, she muttered, Men can be utterly useless, but my daughter's milk cannot be allowed to go cold. 2. Babies are waiting. I burst out laughing. A genuine laugh. I never expected such a bizarre sentence to pull me out of the feeling of being abandoned at the Preston solicitor's office. I sat on the bed feeding the twins. My mother sat beside me, watching me for a long time. She didn't curse Charles anymore, perhaps afraid that hearing it would hurt me, but her silence was heavier than any scolding. After a while, she whispered, Amelia, my daughter is so good. How dare they treat you like rubbish? I looked down at the babies, tears silently falling onto the muslin cloth. I didn't want to cry, but those words touched the deepest wound in my heart. All these years, I had constantly tried to prove I was worthy of love, worthy of being a Davies, worthy of being Charles Kensington's wife, worthy of being acknowledged. Now, my mother used one sentence to articulate what I hadn't dared to admit. I was never rubbish. I had just spent too long alongside people who didn't know how to value me. That afternoon, I slept for almost 2 hours. When I woke up, the room was very quiet. The twins were lying in their cots by the bed. The baby girl was sleeping, with her head turned toward her brother while the boy had his arms splayed out, as if trying to shield his sister. My mother was sitting by the window, holding her phone but not calling anyone, probably afraid of waking me. Seeing my eyes open, she immediately walked over. How are you feeling? I looked at her, naturally desperate to call her Mum, but swallowed it down. Better, Aunt Victoria, she smiled, though her eyes were red. Good, and don't worry about the divorce. Even if he runs to the ends of the earth, I will drag him back to sign it. I looked at her, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt I had a solid anchor. Even with that paper incomplete, I knew my life was beginning to slip from Charles Kensington's grasp. Towards evening, my phone rang. It was Charles. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. His voice came through, deeper than it was that morning. My grandparents know what happened. They're coming to the Chelsea house tonight. My grandmother had a mild heart palpitation when she heard I wasn't there while you were giving birth. Receive them carefully, and don't say anything to upset her. I gripped the phone tightly. He was still the same. No matter what happened, the responsibility of keeping the peace always fell on my head. Before I could reply, my mother looked over, her eyes instantly turning icy. I merely said, No. Charles paused, then added, As for this morning, we'll deal with it. Another day. I looked at my 2 sleeping children, my voice soft but clear. Charles, Kensington, you can delay it for a day, but you can't delay it for a lifetime. I hung up. Outside the window, the London sky began to darken, signaling an unsettled night ahead. That evening, the townhouse was lit up earlier than usual. The housekeeper tidied the living room, prepared tea, and readied warm water exactly as my mother had instructed. But the atmosphere in the house felt as heavy as the Proston injury, moments before a severe thunderstorm. I sat on my bed, propped up on pillows, the twins lying next to me in their new double cot. The boy slept peacefully, while the girl occasionally smacked her lips, her tiny hands shifting as if dreaming. My mother checked my blankets for the 3rd time, then turned to the maternity nurse, instructing her to take the babies to the nursery immediately if too many guests arrived. Listening to her organize everything, I felt both amused and bitter. In the past, whenever the Kensingtons had guests, I was the one running around preparing everything. Now, for the first time, I was placed in a position where I was the one being protected. Just past 7 p.m., cars pulled into the driveway. My mother stood by the window, looking down, her expression darkening immediately. She whispered, Here, you stay in bed. Don't push yourself for anyone. I nodded. A moment. Later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Charles opened the door first. And behind him were his grandparents, Lord and Lady Kensington, the 2 people who had treated me the kindest in that entire family. Lady Kensington was over 70, her hair mostly silver, leaning on a dark, wooden walking cane. The moment she entered and saw me in my maternity clothes, looking so pale, with 2 tiny babies beside me, her eyes immediately turned red. Lord Kensington stood behind her. Usually a stern man, his mouth trembled. When he saw the babies, I leaned on my hands, trying to sit up to greet them. Lady Kensington hurried forward, her voice hoarse and urgent. Lie down right now. You've just given birth. Don't move around. Her genuine concern choked me up. Throughout my marriage to Charles, his grandparents were the rare few who truly saw me as their granddaughter-in-law. When Charles was paralyzed, she had held my hand multiple times and said, You've suffered for us, my dear. When I was pregnant, Lord Kensington often sent bird's nest soup and supplements, quietly telling the 40 and Frumsislos staff not to let Charles know. I knew they loved me, but their love was tied to the Kensington family, to a marriage I no longer had the strength to hold on to. Lady Kensington sat by the bed, her trembling hand touching mine, seeing the bruise from the IV needle. Then she whipped her head around to glare at Charles. Her gaze was so sharp it startled even me. Come here. Her voice wasn't loud, but the room fell dead silent. Charles stood at the door, frowning. Lady Kensington struck her cane against the floor, enunciating every word. Come over here and apologize to your wife and children, right now. Charles clearly hadn't expected her to say this in front of my mother and the Ralji housekeeper. His face looked terrible, but knowing her heart condition, he stepped forward. He stood by the bed, looking at me. In his eyes there was annoyance, dissatisfaction, and something else very hard to name. Finally, he dropped a single, short sentence. I'm sorry. The words fell lightly, lacking sincerity. And remorse. Hearing them, I felt not a ripple of emotion. I used to desperately. I want him to apologize. I wanted him to say he was wrong. I wanted him to acknowledge the nights I stayed awake, the cold dinners, the humiliation I swallowed in front of Eleanor. But when the words finally came, they were like a dry leaf falling onto a frozen lake, unable to create a single ripple. Lady Kensington, however, was not as forgiving as I was. She raised her wooden cane and struck Charles squarely on the calf. The sound of wood hitting fabric wasn't loud, but it made everyone jump. Bow your head and apologize properly. Why are you standing straight like you're signing a shareholder agreement? Apologize to your wife, not to a board of directors. Charles stiffened, his face going from white to red. He looked at his grandmother, but she raised the cane again. What are you looking at? Do you think because you're grown I can't hit you? When you were bedridden, who sponge-bathed you? Who stayed up all night changing your dressings? Who was gossiped about by the whole family and still didn't leave you? Now she has given you twins, and you run off after another woman. Charles Kensington, do you have any shame left? Every word she spoke unearthed the years I had tried to bury. I lowered my head, not wanting anyone to see my eyes turn red. My mother stood by the bed, her hands gripping the footboards so tightly her knuckles were white. I knew she was trying her hardest to hold back. If it weren't for the fact that Lady Kensington genuinely loved me, my mother wouldn't have remained silent. Lord Kensington stepped forward, his voice deep and stern. Charles, apologize. Properly. Charles closed his eyes for a second, then bowed his head lower. This time, his voice was a bit quieter. Amelia, I'm sorry. How I handled things. Yesterday and this morning was inappropriate. I looked at him, suddenly wanting to laugh. Inappropriate. He used such a mild word to describe abandoning his wife right after childbirth, walking out on divorce papers, and letting another woman trample on my dignity. Businessmen truly are excellent at choosing words. Even their sins are packaged neatly to sound pleasant. Lady Kensington turned back to me, her eyes softening instantly. She took my hand, her voice choking. Amelia, my dear, don't be afraid. As long as I draw breath, I won't let anyone bully you. You stayed by him when he was half dead. You are the savior of the Kensington family. If this bastard dares to repay kindness with cruelty, I won't forgive him even from my grave. Hearing her call me my dear made my heart ache. She had called me that since the day I entered the Kensington family, when everyone else saw me as a glorified nurse they had bought. Only she would secretly slip me an envelope of cash, whispering that a married woman should have her own money. I knew she was good to me, and knowing that made this all the more difficult. I could resent Charles, resent my adoptive parents, resent Eleanor, but I couldn't be cold to his grandparents. My mother finally spoke up. She stood on the other side of the bed, her posture calm but her tone much icier than usual. Lady Kensington, I can see you care for Amelia, but caring doesn't mean forcing her to continue enduring this. A woman who just gave birth, whose husband wasn't there, and now has to listen to an apology as forced as a rehearsed script. Do you think that is enough? The room fell silent. Lady Kensington looked at my mother, likely wondering, since she entered, who this woman was. Charles frowned immediately. Madam, this is my family's business. You have no right to speak so harshly. My mother sneered. Your family's business? When you abandoned her alone at the Plaisannid solicitor's office, why didn't you remember this was your family's business? When another woman gets pregnant and spreads rumors that Amelia is the homewrecker, why didn't you remember she was your wife? Charles choked on his words. Lord Kensington stared at my mother for a long time, suspicion in his eyes, but he didn't argue. Lady Kensington sighed, her voice weakening slightly. I know my grandson is in the wrong, but the twins were just born. If they divorce now, the children will suffer. Amelia, for the Fordingless sake of the children, can you give him one more chance? I'll keep an eye on him. If he dares to act out again, I'll break his legs. The last sentence might have been funny under normal circumstances, but right now my heart just felt heavy. I looked at her silver hair and thin hands clutching mine. I knew she was using all her love to try and hold together a roof for my children, but she didn't know that the roof had been leaking for a long time. So much so that even if I held my children tightly while standing, under it, I couldn't escape the freezing cold. My mother didn't let me struggle for long. She looked directly at Lady Kensington, her voice calm but sharp. My lady, children need a complete family. Yes, but complete doesn't just mean having parents on paper. If a father makes a mother cry every day, a child growing up in that house won't be happy. Amelia is only 25. She cannot spend her entire life paying the price for the stupidity of a man. She spoke so bluntly that Charles's face went completely cold. He looked at me, his voice suddenly rising. Have you done enough? How badly do you want this? Divorce that you have to let an outsider stand here and lecture me? His words were like a familiar knife, stabbing right into his habit of shifting the blame. Before I could respond, Lady Kensington furiously struck his leg again with her. Kane, shut your mouth. This outsider knows how to care for your wife better than you do. What right do you have to speak? Charles couldn't dodge in time, and took several hits, looking so pathetic that the housekeeper at the door lowered her head, not daring to look. If it were the past, I would definitely have felt heartbroken. I would have begged his grandmother to stop hitting him, terrified he would be upset. But today, I just sat still, not out of spite, but because I was too exhausted to keep protecting someone who had never protected me. After a few swings, Lady Kensington gasped for air, clutching her chest. Lord Kensington immediately supported her, taking a pill from his pocket and giving it to her. The room panicked. Instinctively, I tried to get out of bed, but my prosely mother held my shoulder down quickly. Stay put. I watched Lady Kensington, genuinely worried. Grandmother, are you all right? She took the pill, breathed for a moment, then waved a hand. I'm fine. I need to live long enough to teach this bastard a lesson. Her words silenced Charles, but seeing her pale face, my heart grew heavier. This was the situation I feared most. If she suffered a heart attack because of me, all the blame would fall on my head again. My mother saw this too. She took a step forward, her tone no longer harsh but composed. Lady Kensington, if your health is poor, you shouldn't get agitated. Amelia gave birth barely 10 days ago. The baby's fussed all night, and she has barely slept. If everyone here truly cares for her, the first thing to do isn't to force her to forgive, but to let her rest. She turned to me, her eyes softening. Amelia, lie down. The babies will need feeding soon. If you don't catch up on sleep, you won't survive. I understood my mother's intent. She was giving me an escape route from this tug of war. I nodded and slowly lay back down. Victoria pulled the covers over. Her movement so natural it looked as if she had done it her entire life. Lady Kensington noticed this, her gaze turning curious. Perhaps she didn't understand why a family friend would care for me so meticulously. But her health didn't allow her to ask. Lord Kensington sighed and helped her up. All right, let Amelia rest. If there's anything else, we'll talk tomorrow. Still reluctant to leave, Lady Kensington leaned over the cot to look at the twins, her eyes melting with affection. The baby boy stirred right then, and her heart softened completely. She whispered, "So good, just like your mother, enduring hardship without making a fuss." Hearing that, tears almost spilled from my eyes. Everyone gradually left the room. Charles was the last to go. Before closing the binomer door, he gave me a long look. His eyes weren't entirely cold anymore, but they were still filled with suspicion and frustration. Perhaps, in his mind, everything that happened today was orchestrated by me. I didn't explain. The door clicked shut, and the room returned to silence. My mother stood by the bed, letting out a very soft breath, then leaned down to adjust my blanket again. She said, "You did the right thing. The weak don't need to go into battle every time. Sometimes just lying still is winning." I looked at her, my throat tight. Aunt Victoria, am I being selfish? His grandmother really does love me. My mother sat down next to me, her eyes deep and full of sorrow. It's not wrong that she loves you, but you are under no obligation to use your life to repay someone else's affection. You can be grateful to her, but you don't need to stay married to her grandson. I closed my eyes, tears slipping onto the pillow. Her words were gentle, but they untied a knot in my heart. All these years, I was always terrified of letting others down, my adoptive parents, the Kensingtons, my own foolish love, but it seemed no one had ever asked, who is terrified of letting me down? The twins in the cot slept peacefully, their tiny, innocent breaths filling the purses room. I turned my head to look at them, my heart suddenly calming. I could respect Lord and Lady Kensington. I could let my children receive their love in the future. But I couldn't, for anyone's sake, return to a path that had cost me my very self. Outside the room, the grandparents didn't leave immediately. They decided to stay at the townhouse for a few days. partly to see their great-grandchildren, and partly to force Charles to treat me decently. The housekeeper rushed to prepare the guest rooms. Charles couldn't object since his grandmother had just had a mild palpitation, so he could only silently accept it. That night, I barely slept deeply, not because the Kensingtons were in the Grantia house, nor because Charles had been forced to move back, but because the twins took turns waking up. The boy usually cried briefly, just a few whimpers, and quieted down when picked up. The girl was different. According to my mother, her temperament was exactly like mine when I was little. When quiet, she was very quiet, but when she cried, she demanded someone coax her properly before she'd stop. Near 2 a.m., I had just closed my eyes when I heard a fussing noise from the purple stoat cot. Instinctively, I tried to sit up, but before my feet even touched the floor, my mother was up faster than me. She draped a thin cardigan over her shoulders and came over to ease me back down. Her voice was groggy but strict. "Stay in bed. Tonight your job is to feed them. The carrying and rocking is my 25. Yob." I watched her lean down and pick up the baby girl. Her movements were still a purred. A bit awkward, but far more natural than yesterday. She patted the baby's back, gently, murmuring, there, is the little princess hungry? Don't cry so hard. Your mummy just had you. If you tire her out, it's Granny who will. Wait, I'll punish you with extra kisses." When she caught herself at the word Granny, she paused quickly, but I still heard it, and my heart softened immensely. The room was lit only by a dim yellow nightlight. Between the two babies, one crying, one scrunching his face, my mother stood in the middle of this strange room, silently learning how to be a grandmother. I felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from a warmth that had arrived far too late. So this was what it felt like to be cared for by family. I didn't even have to open my mouth to ask. They already knew what I needed. The baby boy woke up to his sister's cries. The maternity nurse, sleeping in the next room, heard the noise and knocked on the door. But my mother waved her hand, lightly, afraid of waking the whole house. She brought the baby girl to me, then picked the boy up from the cot. I sat against the headboard, adjusting my lawn. Ate two hoo-hoo, closed to feed them both. The pain in my lower abdomen flared, making my back stiffen, but looking at the two tiny faces pressed against me, my heart settled. My mother stood beside me, holding a flask of warm water in one hand and adjusting the edge of my blanket with the other, while muttering, "When they grow up, I'll tell them how the two of them teamed up to torture their mother on their first night home. But they're too young now, so I'll put it on their tab and settle the score when they can walk." I laughed. The baby boy currently feeding was startled by my laugh and immediately frowned as if displeased. My mother looked down at him and said, "Seriously? Well, he looks just like your father. So young and already hates people laughing during business hours." I laughed again, but my throat tightened. My mother's humor wasn't loud, but it pulled me out of my heavy feelings brilliantly. Perhaps over 20 years of searching for a child had taught her how to smile through pain, how to use a light remark to cover an hopeless entire landscape of wounds. When the babies finished, my mother carefully placed them back in their cots. She stood by the bed, looked at me for a moment, then took out her phone and typed something. I received a text immediately after. "Until the divorce papers are final, the Kensingtons cannot know our relationship. If they know you're a Harrington, they might use the twins, the grandparents, and business interests to keep you here. Just remember, Mum is here not to make decisions for you, but to ensure you have the power to decide for yourself." I read every word, feeling as if someone had placed a warm compress on my heart. My mother wasn't forcing me to go public, nor forcing me to return to Edinburgh immediately. She just wanted me to have an exit strategy, a pillar of support, and the right to choose how it all ended. I picked up my phone and replied, "I understand. Thank you, Mum." Typing the word Mum, my hand shook slightly. This was the first time I had called her that, even if only in a text. My mother read it, and her eyes turned instantly red. She turned her face away for a few seconds, but afraid I would see her cry, she quickly deleted the text, and I did the same. The two of us looked at each other in the dim light, neither speaking, but inside me, something slowly began to heal. The pain didn't vanish, but the wound was finally wrapped in tenderness. Outside the room, the corridor was very quiet. I didn't know if the grandparent had heard the babies crying, nor did I know if Charles was awake in his study. But for the first time, I no longer cared whether he knew how hard I was working. The next morning, the babies started crying just past 6 a.m. I was half awake when my mother sat up. She picked up the boy first, rocking him while eyeing the girl who was preparing to join in, looking as serious as if handling a difficult board meeting. Have you two negotiated this? One crying is enough. If you both cry, how is your mother supposed to sleep? The baby girl gave her no face and immediately cried louder. I opened my eyes, feeling both in pain and amused. She's probably hungry, Aunt. Victoria. My mother turned, looking slightly annoyed that I was awake. I told them to let you sleep a bit longer and they didn't listen. When they grow up, I'm deducting from their Christmas money. I propped myself up, and she supported my back instantly. Just then, there was a soft noise at the door. From the hallway, Lady Kensington called out gently, "Amelia, are you awake? Are the twins all right?" My mother and I exchanged a look. She frowned, clearly not wanting the Kensingtons walking in, while I was nursing. I also knew that if I didn't answer, Lady Kensington might get too worried and open the door. I pulled the blanket up higher and called, "Out, I'm awake, grandmother. They're just hungry and crying. I'm feeding them. Now, please don't worry." The outside fell silent for a few seconds before her voice softened completely. "All right, take your time. Don't let yourself get cold. Call me if you need anything," Lord Kensington added. "No need to rush down for breakfast. I'll have someone bring some porridge up later." Hearing their genuine concern softened my heart, but I quickly suppressed that feeling. Care is care, but a marriage is a marriage. I couldn't use their affection to patch the massive hole Charles had torn open. A moment later, I heard the study door open. Charles's voice drifted from the hallway, slightly hoarse, as if he hadn't slept well. "Grandfather, grandmother, I'm heading to the Granaress office. We'll talk tonight." Lady Kensington was immediately displeased. "Your wife just gave birth. The twins fussed all night, and you aren't even going in to check on them?" Charles was silent for a few seconds. I was nursing the baby, hearing him stand outside the door, but he didn't knock. Finally, he just said, "She's busy. I'm leaving. For work." The footsteps faded away. I looked down at my child, feeling incredibly calm. In the past, if he left without looking at me, my heart would ache all day. Now, I just thought it was better that he left. Some absences, repeated long enough, eventually become a habit and then become the reason you no longer need them. After breakfast, the maternity nurse took the twins down to the living room so the grandparents could see them. Lady Kensington was so overjoyed she forgot her anger from the night before, leaning over the prams calling them sweethearts. Non-stop. Lord Kensington, usually a man of few words, secretly offered his finger for the baby boy to grasp, then smiled very faintly. I sat in my room, watching them through the baby monitor, my feelings complicated. My children had the right to receive love from their father's family. I didn't want to cut off their affection out of adult resentment. But it only made me more certain that when I left the Kensington household, I had to leave cleanly without letting anyone use the children as a rope to pull me back to suffer. When it was just the two of us in the room, my mother sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone, showing me a message. It was from my father. He said, the Harrington & Co. branch in London was ready to open earlier than expected. If I couldn't return to Edinburgh just yet, I could start learning the ropes. Here first. I stared blankly after reading it. Harrington & Co. was a massive diamond and fine jewelry empire. Even someone like me, who didn't follow business, had heard the name. When I was young, Beatrice Davies used to see their adverts on TV and say that some people were born into wealth, while people like me had to know our place. I never expected that the wealth in her mouth was tied directly to my biological family. I looked up at my mother, my voice shrinking, but I don't know anything about management. I dropped out of my accounting degree halfway. For years, I've just been at home looking after Charles and the pregnancy. I'm afraid I won't be able to do it. My mother didn't laugh at me, nor did she offer empty platitudes like, my daughter is the best, of course you can. She just held my hand, her voice incredibly grounded. If you don't know, you learn. You don't have to become a CEO overnight. When I first married your father, I couldn't tell a diamond from synthetic zirconia. I learned bit by bit. If I made a mistake, I fixed it. If I didn't understand, I asked. Being ignorant isn't scary. What's scary is not daring to begin. I looked at her hand, remembering the years I had shrunk myself in the last Kensington house. I used to have dreams. I wanted to finish my degree, wanted to open a small bakery, wanted to live an ordinary but valuable life. After marrying Charles, I boxed all of that away because I thought being a good wife was busy enough. Now, my mother was placing a brand new path in front of me. I was terrified, but I also desperately wanted to step onto it. My mother seemed to read my mind and continued. Your father also said that none of your 3 brothers are willing to take over the main business properly. Oliver is obsessed with the law, William is obsessed with catching criminals, and Julian is obsessed with cameras. If you also refuse to learn, when father and I are old, are we supposed to hand the entire empire over to outsiders? That made me laugh. Did he really say that? My mother raised an eyebrow. He also said whoever doesn't learn management gets fewer shares. He hasn't dared send that to the family group chat yet, afraid your 3rd brother will throw a blings tantrum on the internal network. I laughed out loud. This time, it wasn't a forced smile. I felt like my life was a room that had just had a new window thrown open. There was a lot of wind outside, but at least the light was pouring in. As we were talking, the housekeeper knocked on the door, her voice hesitant. Madam, Mr. and Mrs. Davies and Miss Eleanor are downstairs. They said they're your family and have come to visit you and the babies. The room went dead. Silent. The smile on my face vanished. My mother put her phone down, the gentle look in her eyes disappearing, replaced by an unmistakable icy glare. How many of them? 3, madam. Miss Eleanor is heavily pregnant as well, the housekeeper replied. I lowered my eyes, my hand unconsciously gripping the duvet. The Davies family hadn't visited when I gave birth, hadn't come when I was discharged, but chose exactly the time when the Kensington grandparents were here to show up with Eleanor. I didn't believe it was a coincidence. My mother looked at me, her voice dropping. Do you want to see them? If not, I'll have them thrown out. I remained silent for a few seconds. In the past, I would have feared Beatrice scolding me for being unfilial, feared Arthur saying I was ungrateful, feared Eleanor shedding tears in front of others and making me the villain. But now, I looked at my 2 sleeping children, then at my mother standing by the bed. I was no longer alone. I slowly sat up. I'll see them. I want to see what kind of play they're trying to put on. My mother helped me into a cardigan, a flicker of satisfaction in Prison Ada. Her eyes, though she still scolded me. Fine, but walk slowly. Dealing with bad people still requires staying warm. If you catch a chill, I'll deal with you first. I smiled very faintly. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard Eleanor's voice coming from the living room. Her voice was still sweet, still soft, the kind of practiced softness that instantly made anyone unaware of the truth pity her. Lady Kensington, I heard Amelia had given birth, so I begged my parents to bring me to visit. After all, she is my sister. We grew up in the same house. We can't stay estranged forever over a little misunderstanding. I stood on the landing, looking down. Eleanor was wearing an ivory maternity dress, her bump very prominent. One hand rested on her belly, the other held an expensive gift bag. Beside her were Arthur and Beatrice Davies. These 2 people had raised me, yet from the beginning until now, they hadn't asked once if my delivery had hurt. They sat in the living room of my house, but their posture was like debt collectors. Lord and Lady Kensington sat opposite them, looking displeased. Lady Kensington clearly disliked Eleanor, especially after learning she was pregnant with Charles's child while I was still his legal wife. But because of her age and wanting to maintain face between the families, she didn't throw them out. I gripped the banister and walked down, step by step. My mother walked closely. Beside me, her hand hovering just behind my back, ready to catch me if I stumbled. The noise made everyone look up. Eleanor was the quickest to react. She stood up, her face instantly looking overjoyed. Amelia, you're downstairs. I was so worried about you. Hearing you had twins, I was so happy for you I had to come. Right away. She said she was happy, but her eyes flicked very quickly over my weakened body, then stopped on my mother with unconcealed curiosity. She was probably wondering who this woman was, who dared to scold Charles in front of his grandparents last night. I reached the living room but didn't sit down immediately. The pain in my abdomen made my back stiff, but I kept my voice calm. Thank you. Now I need to go back up and check on the twins. Saying that, I turned to leave. Beatrice slammed her teacup down on the table. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to make everyone turn. She looked at me with that familiar gaze, the gaze I had endured for over 20 years, full of blame and control. Amelia Davies, your parents take the time to visit you, and this is your attitude? You marry a rich man, give birth to his kids, and now you don't even respect your adoptive parents anymore? If it were before, I would have immediately bowed my head and apologized. But today I just looked at her for a long time. This woman had taught me to be grateful, but had never taught Eleanor to have any shame. I gave a light laugh, my voice not loud but clear. Then what kind of attitude would you like me to have, Mother? Should I happily welcome Eleanor, who is pregnant with my husband's child, as she visits me during my postpartum confinement? The living room fell dead silent. Beatrice's face stiffened. Eleanor leaned slightly, a hand supporting her bump, her eyes reddening in seconds. Amelia, why do you have to speak so harshly? I know you're angry with me, but the baby is innocent. Besides, in love, it's not always who comes first who wins. Charles. And I loved each other first. I cut her off, maintaining a cold smile. You've said that line many times. You don't need to perform it again. But don't forget, the name on the marriage certificate with Charles Kensington is mine. You bring your pregnant belly to the house of his legal wife and then tell me I'm speaking harshly? Eleanor, you really have no shame. Eleanor flushed, tears instantly falling. Arthur Davies frowned, his voice dropping. Amelia, how are you speaking to your sister? Eleanor is pregnant. Can't you just yield to her a bit? Hearing the word yield, my heart went ice cold. From childhood to adulthood, I had heard this phrase too many times. Yield my dress to Eleanor because she's the younger sister. Yield my room to Eleanor because she just came back. Yield the tutoring sessions because the family couldn't afford both. And in the end, I even had to yield my own husband? I looked at Arthur, asking softly, Father, I've yielded to her for over 20 perts. Years. Now she wants to take my husband, my dignity, and even wants to trample on my postpartum recovery to play the victim. Do you still think I should yield? Arthur was struck speechless. Beatrice immediately took over. You're ungrateful. Without the Davies family, would you be where you are today? Eleanor has always had fragile health. What's wrong with us loving her a bit more? My mother finally stepped forward. She stood beside me, elegant, but her eyes were so cold that Eleanor unconsciously took a half step back. My mother looked straight at Eleanor's belly, speaking very slowly. Fragile health isn't a license to steal someone else's husband, and being pregnant isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. Miss Eleanor, your belly is certainly large, but your status is so small I can't even see where it fits. The sentence contained no profanity, but it was so venomous it sucked the air. Out of the room, Lord Kensington coughed lightly, turning his face away. I suspected he was holding back a laugh, but given the tension, it wasn't the time to show it. Eleanor turned pale. She had never been spoken to so bluntly to her face. Usually, the moment her face flushed, the Davies family would rush to her defense, and Charles would coldly reprimand me for being unreasonable. But Charles wasn't here today, and my mother wasn't someone who would be fooled by a few tears. Eleanor bit her lip, her voice trembling. Who are you to speak to me like that? This is our family's business. What right do you have to interfere? My mother smiled a beautiful but freezing smile. I am the person caring for Amelia during her confinement. You came here to agitate a new mother. I have the right to protect my patient. If you think that's not enough, I also have the right of a normal woman who cannot stand the sight of someone parading a plasclus, pregnant belly in front of another woman's wife. Beatrice immediately stood up, her face ugly. Who are you calling that kind of person? Don't think just because you're dressed well you can insult whoever you want. Amelia is the daughter I raised. I don't need you interfering in how I discipline my child. My mother looked at her, her gaze suddenly dropping. Discipline your child? You. Teach an adopted child to yield until she loses her marriage, and teach your aslane, biological child, to parade her pregnancy in front of her sister to show off. Your method of disciplining children is truly an eye-opener. Beatrice was trembling with rage. I knew she was about to get physical. Sure. Enough. Just as she was about to step forward, Eleanor was faster. She raised her hand, aiming straight for my mother's face, screaming, "Shut your mouth!" I don't know where I found the strength. Perhaps from the word mum I held in my heart. Perhaps from the two children sleeping upstairs. Or perhaps from all the times I had silently endured. I stepped forward, raising my hand faster than her. A sharp slap echoed across the living room. Eleanor's face whipped to the closet side, her entire body freezing in shock. My hand stung, and the post-surgery pain flared, making my vision darken slightly. But I stood up straight. I looked at her, every word biting. You can scold me. You can put on an act in front of me, and I might tolerate it. But if you dare touch the person caring for me and my children, I will not tolerate it anymore. My mother immediately supported my waist from behind, her voice dropping. You just gave birth. Who told you to exert force? It sounded like a scolding, but her hand was trembling. I knew she was terrified I had hurt myself. Eleanor clutched her cheek, tears falling like rain. After a few seconds of stunned silence, she suddenly grabbed her belly and sank onto the sofa, her voice weak. My baby. Mum. Dad. My stomach hurts so much. She hit me. She's trying to harm my baby. Beatrice screamed, rushing to support her daughter, then spun around, pointing a finger at me. Amelia Davies, you're evil. Your sister is pregnant. Are you even human? I watched the familiar performance, feeling cold but not panicked. In the past, every time Eleanor cried, I became the one at fault. But today, I knew this. Living room had CCTV, and more importantly, behind me was my mother, Beatrice. Lunged toward me in a fury, her hand raised high. My mother didn't wait for her to touch me. She stepped forward and slapped Beatrice squarely across the face. A second slap echoed, even louder than the first. The entire living room froze. Beatrice clutched her face, staring at my mother in disbelief. My mother stood there, not a tall woman, but possessing an aura that made people terrified to step closer. She spoke, every word incredibly slow. That slap was me returning. The years you've ridden roughshod over Amelia, you raised her, and if you truly loved her, I would thank you. But if you use the debt of raising her to force her to swallow humiliation, then you don't deserve the title of adoptive mother. Standing behind her, tears unconsciously fell from my eyes. This was the first time someone had slapped Beatrice back for my sake. This was also the first time someone had stated plainly that the debt of raising me wasn't a noose to strangle me for the rest of my life. Arthur Davies stood up furiously. He pointed at my mother, his voice shaking with anger. You've gone too far. Who on earth are you? My mother looked at him, terrifyingly calm. Who I am isn't important. What's important is that if anything happens to Amelia today because you lot came here to cause trouble, I will make you pay the legal price. Lord and Lady Kensington could no longer sit still. Lady Kensington leaned on her cane and stood up, her face pale but her voice clear. Enough. Did the Davies family come to visit, or did you come to torture my granddaughter-in-law? To death? Amelia gave birth less than 10 days ago, and a woman pregnant with her husband's child dares to come here crying and screaming. If you have no shame, the Kensington family still does. Lord Kensington, his face icy, called the housekeeper to get a car to take Miss Eleanor to the hospital. If she really is having stomach pains, the Kensingtons will pay the medical bill. But no one is to say Amelia was at fault before we review the CCTV. The mention of CCTV made Eleanor's face freeze instantly. She clutched her belly, but her eyes darted in panic toward the corner of the room. I caught that moment. She knew the camera would show her raising her hand first, but having acted this far, she couldn't stop. She cried louder, saying she was in pain, saying the baby was innocent, saying I hated her and was using the opportunity to harm her. The housekeeper hurriedly called a car. Beatrice supported her daughter, cursing my cruelty. I listened, losing all desire to argue. Some people only believe the story they want to believe. Explaining further only gives them more stage to perform on. Right in the middle of the chaos, Charles returned. He walked into the living room to see Eleanor crying and clutching her stomach, Beatrice with a red, swollen face, and me leaning against my mother, pale from pain. In that instant, I saw the old habit flash in his eyes. Almost immediately, he looked at me with a reproachful gaze. Amelia, what have you done now? Just that one sentence. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask who started it, didn't notice my hand shaking from the pain. I felt my heart go utterly cold. But before I could open my mouth, Lady Kensington stepped forward, her cane thumping, her voice furious. You came back just in time. This woman brought her pregnant belly to your wife's house to provoke her, tried to hit the person, caring for your wife, and is now clutching her stomach, acting out a play. And you want to blame someone? Charles Kensington, where is your face? Charles froze. He looked at Eleanor, then at me. Eleanor sobbed hysterically. Charles, I didn't. I just wanted to visit her. She hit me first. My stomach hurt so much. Charles instinctively stepped toward her, but paused when he saw Lord Kensington staring at him coldly. Lord Kensington said, if you want to know who is right or wrong, look at the CCTV. Don't humiliate the Kensington family any further. Charles's face turned awful. He wasn't used to being blocked by both his grandparents, nor was he used to seeing me not explaining myself. My mother supported me, whispering, go upstairs. You're shaking. I nodded. As I walked past Charles, he looked at me, his eyes complex. I didn't stop. The stairs ahead were slightly blurry, but my mother's hand held me so firmly I knew I wouldn't fall. Back in my room, I practically collapsed onto the bed. The surgical pain throbbed in waves, cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. My mother instantly called the nurse to watch the babies, then checked my face. She didn't scold me in front of others, but once the door was closed, she couldn't help tapping my forehead lightly. Who told you to lunge forward and hit someone? Do you think you're perfectly healthy? I lowered my head, my voice small. I'm sorry, but she was going to hit you. My final words were very soft, yet my mother instantly went quiet. She looked at me, her eyes turning red in a flash. After a long while, she exhaled and pulled the duvet over me. Next time, let Mom hit her. I spent over 20 years looking for you, not so you could protect me right after giving birth. I looked at her and the tears fell again. This time, I didn't hide them. Downstairs, the sound of the car taking Eleanor to the hospital faded away. A moment later, my mother's phone buzzed. She opened it to see a message from my eldest brother, Oliver. During the chaos earlier, she had sent him the CCTV footage. His message contained a single line. Tell my sister to rest. Leave the tray to rest to me. My mother showed me the screen. I read it, and the tears that had just dried. I wanted to fall again. In the past, whenever something happened, I always had to figure out how to explain myself, how to prove I wasn't wrong, how to endure the slime and suspicious looks. Now, just one sentence. Leave it to me was enough to make my elevation. Shoulders feel so much lighter. At the hospital, Eleanor was wheeled into the maternity ward amidst a lot of noise. Beatrice walked alongside her crying, demanding the doctor check on her grandchild, acting as if a single second's delay would make the entire hospital guilty of a crime against the Davies family. Charles stood a few steps away, his expression dark. He was used to Eleanor shrinking weakly behind him, used to assuming that if she cried, someone else must have hurt her. But today, the image of my mother's back protecting me, my slap, his grandmother's words about the CCTV, all of it hovered in his mind. Lord and Lady Kensington also came to the hospital, not because they believed Eleanor, but because they feared if something really happened to her, the Davies family would pin all the blame on me. Lady Kensington sat in the waiting area, leaning on her cane, her face colder than it had ever been. The doctor checked Eleanor for nearly half an hour. When the door opened, Beatrice lunged forward to ask if her daughter was okay. The doctor pulled down his mask, speaking calmly. The fetus is currently stable. Heartbeat is normal. The mother was slightly agitated and needs rest. Avoid stress. Those few words instantly diffused the tension in the corridor. Lady Kensington closed her eyes and exhaled, unclear if out of relief or anger. Eleanor was wheeled out, her face a bit pale but tears still wet on her cheeks. The moment she saw Charles, she reached out weakly. "Charles, I was so scared. When she slapped me, I thought I was going to lose our baby." Charles looked at her outstretched hand, taking a beat longer than usual before stepping forward. But before he could say anything, a calm male voice rang out from the end of the corridor. If Miss Eleanor was truly so afraid of losing her, "Baby, next time don't bring your pregnant belly to a new mother's house to cause trouble." Everyone turned around. Oliver Harrington, wearing a light blue shirt, holding a leather briefcase, walked toward them with a calm demeanor, looking as if he had just left a court hearing rather than walking into a messy family dispute. Behind him was a young assistant holding a tablet. Eleanor didn't know who he was, but her instincts told her this man wouldn't be easy to deal with. Beatrice frowned first. "Who are you?" "This is our family's business," Oliver stopped a few steps from the hospital bed, politely nodded to Lord and Lady Kensington, then looked at Beatrice. "I am a barrister, authorized by the person caring for Mrs. Amelia Kensington to temporarily represent her in handling the incident where Miss Eleanor and her parents came to her residence to agitate a new mother." His voice wasn't loud, but every word was as clear as a knife placed on a table. Beatrice's face changed instantly. "What barrister? It's just sisters arguing." "Don't blow this out of proportion." Oliver didn't argue. He opened the tablet and turned the screen toward everyone. The CCTV footage from the living room played back crystal clear from Eleanor's passive-aggressive remarks to my mother speaking up. To the exact moment Eleanor raised her hand to slap my mother, nothing was missing. Then it showed me stepping up to slap her. Beatrice wanted to say something, but her lips moved without forming words. Eleanor lay on the bed, her face white. She said weakly, "I was just too agitated. She said horrible things about me first." Oliver looked at her, his gaze so composed it was infuriating. "You were agitated, so you decided to hit the person caring for the mother. But when my sister reacted, it became an intentional attempt to harm your fetus." "Your logic is truly fascinating." The two words my sister made Charles snap his head up. He looked at Oliver, his eyes full of suspicion. Oliver seemed to realize he had spoken too intimately, but his expression didn't betray any deceit. He corrected himself naturally. "I mean, Mrs. Amelia is younger than me, and my client specifically asked me to protect her rights. Calling her my sister isn't an overstatement." Lord Kensington gave Oliver a second look, a deeper thought flashing in his somber eyes. Lady Kensington didn't care about titles. She just stared at the video, her face growing darker by the second. She turned to Charles, her voice ice cold. "Do you see? She was going to hit someone first. Your wife, who had to be helped down the stairs, jumped in to protect someone. Yet you come home, and the first thing you do is ask her what trouble she caused." "Charles Kensington, where do you put your face?" Charles stood absolutely still. The video was like a slap, soundless, but more painful than his grandmother's cane. He saw me clearly in the footage. I was wearing loose clothes, face pale as paper, one hand leaning on a chair in pain. Yet when Eleanor raised her hand toward my mother, I lunged forward faster than anyone. He remembered what I said in the bedroom. "I want you out of my life, legally and permanently." At the time, he thought I was just angry, trying to talk tough. But in the video, the look in my eyes when I stared at Eleanor wasn't that of a jealous wife. It was the look of someone pushed to her absolute limit, left only with the instinct to protect the person standing by her side. Oliver turned off the tablet and pulled out a stack of papers. "At present, my client has no intention of pursuing criminal charges. However, the fact that you all showed up uninvited at the mother's residence, used provocative language, and attempted assault which caused her surgical wounds to flare up, has all been officially recorded. If, in the future, any rumors appear on the internet or within your social circles claiming Amelia intentionally harmed Miss Eleanor's fetus, we will initiate a defamation lawsuit immediately." Beatrice went red with anger. "Who are you threatening? Amelia is the daughter I raised. Can't I scold her a bit?" Oliver looked at her, his voice perfectly even. "The act of raising her does not grant you the right to violate her health and dignity. And the more you mention raising her, the more I want to ask, When you adopted her all those years ago, did you have full legal documentation? That question caused Arthur Davies's face to change drastically. He usually stood in the background, but suddenly his voice went deep. Barrister, what are you implying? Oliver gave a faint smile. I'm not implying anything, I'm just asking. If the paperwork is complete, you have no reason to be tense. The corridor fell silent for a few seconds. Charles caught that moment. Arthur avoided Oliver's eyes, and Beatrice immediately turned to coddle Eleanor, as if her daughter's weakness was the perfect excuse to stop answering questions. Charles wasn't an idiot. Having been in business for years, he was all too familiar with the reactions of people hiding something. For the first time, a vague suspicion formed in his mind. Exactly how did Amelia grow up in the Davies household? At the same time, in an old hospital in Cornwall, my second brother, William, stood in a dilapidated records room. He wasn't in uniform, just wearing a simple shirt and holding a document bag. The middle-aged woman sitting opposite him used to be a maternity nurse. Over 20 years ago, she had retired, her hair now mostly gray. When William brought up the missing baby girl from that year, her hands noticeably trembled. She said that year a baby girl just a few months old vanished from the ward. She was wearing a silver bracelet engraved with Amelia Harrington. The family searched everywhere, the mother fainting multiple times at the door. Later, the case dragged on because the hospital changed staff. Some records were lost, and the nurses on duty that day eventually left. William asked detailed questions, his voice deep but unpressured. The nurse finally remembered something. There was a couple from London who loitered around the maternity ward for a few days before the baby disappeared. The woman had a distinct London accent and a small mole on the left side of her neck. William instantly thought of Beatrice Davies. He didn't jump to conclusions, just recorded the statement and requested copies of the remaining documents. When he walked out of the old hospital, the Cornwall sun was setting. He stood under the eaves and called Oliver. I have a lead. It doesn't look like they just picked up an abandoned baby, as the Davies family claims. Amelia disappeared from the hospital with her bracelet. I'm going to track down the staff on duty that day. The other end was quiet for a few seconds before Oliver said, I just ran into the Davies family at the hospital. Their reaction wasn't clean. William watched the traffic, his eyes turning cold. If they truly knew my sister had a family, looking for her and still hid it, I won't let them get away with it. Oliver replied briefly, by the book, but to the very end. Back at the Chelsea townhouse, I listened to my mother give a brief summary of Oliver going to the hospital. She didn't say too much, afraid I'd overthink it. She just said the CCTV footage had been given to the solicitor, so the Davies family couldn't twist the truth for now. I sat on the bed, the baby girl, sleeping on my chest after feeding. Her warm breath washed over my thin shirt. Looking at her, my heart gradually settled. I used to be so afraid that the truth would never be seen, afraid that if I spoke up, I'd be called jealous, ungrateful, or vicious. Now I had CCTV, a solicitor, and a brother quietly investigating for me. But deep down, I still felt a pang of pain. Even though the Davies family had treated me unfairly, they had once been the place I called home. Some wounds don't hurt any less, just because the person who inflicted them is wicked. They hurt because you were once sincere. My mother seemed to see right through me. She lifted the baby girl off my chest, placed her in the cot, and sat back down by the bed. Are you sad about the Davies family? I stayed silent. She didn't scold me, just sighed softly. It's normal to be sad. A person who always wanted a home, even if that home is leaking, will still look back when they finally walk out. But Amelia, you must. Remember, feeling pain doesn't mean you should go back and stand under that leaking roof. Once it hurts, pull your hand away from the knife. Don't fall in love with the knife just because your hand is bleeding. Hearing that, tears quietly fell. My mother didn't demand I hate them instantly. She gave me the right to be sad, to feel regret, then gently reminded me not to hurt myself further. This was the love I had always wished for. Late that night, Charles returned to the townhouse. I heard the car in the Freeney driveway but didn't ask. My mother had gone to the next room to rest for a bit. The maternity nurse had put the twins in their cots. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the humidifier. There were 2 knocks on the door. I said, "Come in." Charles walked in, still wearing the clothes from the hospital, but his face looked entirely different from usual. He looked at me, his gaze lingering on my face longer than normal. "I've seen the CCTV. I adjusted the blanket for the blanket." "Baby boy?" My tone flat. "Yes." He seemed unaccustomed to my reaction. In the past, if he initiated a conversation, I would immediately look up, explain, or try to find some tenderness in his voice. Now I just replied with a single word, as if the matter had nothing to do with my emotions. Charles stood by the cot, looking at the sleeping twins. The boy shifted, his hand curling into a tiny fist. For a fleeting moment, Charles's eyes softened. "Have you thought of names for them yet?" The question came so late, I wanted to laugh. He was their father, but only now remembered to ask what they were. Called. I looked at him and said calmly, "For now, their nicknames are Alfie and Lily. Official names can wait until the paperwork is done." He frowned. "Why wait for the paperwork?" I looked up, meeting his eyes. Directly. "Because I'm not sure I want them to carry the Kensington name." The temperature in the room plummeted. Charles looked at me as if he couldn't believe I'd say that. I knew it struck a blow to his pride, but I didn't take it back. If he could abandon me while I gave birth, let others call me the other woman, then he had no right to assume these children would automatically take his name as a matter of course. He was silent for a very long time, finally just saying, "Amelia, you've changed." I lowered my head, laughing softly. "No, I just don't want to live like I used to." That left him speechless. He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out. Standing outside the bedroom door, Charles lingered for a long time. He had intended to go to his study, but his feet stopped in the hallway. From inside the room, my voice drifted out, coaxing the babies. It was soft and hoarser than before due to lack of sleep. "Alfie, be a good boy, don't wake your sister." "Lily's a good girl too, Mummy's here." The nicknames sounded so ridiculously soft, yet for some reason they made his chest feel heavy. He remembered that for a very long period, that voice used to be in his ear every night. When he lay paralyzed in the hospital, unable to move half his body, his world reduced to the smell of antiseptic, the beep of machines, and endless darkness, it was me who sat by his side reading the news, reading books, even recounting trivial things from my day so he wouldn't feel left behind. He wasn't fully awake. He wasn't entirely deaf either. He remembered hearing me say, "Charles, it's raining today. When you wake up, I'll wheel you out to the worked balcony to see the roses blooming." He had forgotten those things for a long time, or more accurately, he had deliberately chosen not to remember. Because remembering meant admitting that the woman he treated with coldness wasn't a useless, clingy dependent, but the Plains of Eyes 27, person who had pulled him out of the abyss, inch by inch. He went to his study, opened his laptop, but couldn't read a single line of his documents. The hospital's CCTV footage kept replaying in his mind. Eleanor raising her hand first, me lunging forward to slap her, not out of jealousy, but to protect the woman caring for me. My face in the video was shockingly pale, almost translucent, yet my eyes were bright and fierce. He had never seen me like that. To him, I had always been gentle, enduring, sometimes so weak it was annoying. But tonight, he suddenly realized that perhaps I wasn't weak. I had simply used all my strength to love him, making me look like someone who could be hurt endlessly without ever fighting back. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. When Henry walked into the boardroom, he saw Charles sitting by the window, his phone screen lit up. On the screen was an old photo taken in the rehab clinic. In the photo, I wore a thin cardigan, my hair tied low, looking down and wiping his hand while he lay in bed. Henry recognized it instantly. Lady Kensington had taken it, saying it was to remind Charles who had stayed by his side when he recovered. But after he got better, the photo was put away, just as my efforts were dismissed day by day. Henry put the files down, unable to hold back his question. "Remembering now?" Charles locked his screen, his voice cold but less sharp. "Do you have too much free time?" Henry smirked. "Whether I have free time doesn't matter. What matters is that your wife doesn't seem to have the free time to wait for you anymore." Charles didn't reply. After a while, he asked, Henry, do you find the woman with Amelia strange? Henry thought for a few seconds. The one called Aunt Victoria? Charles nodded. Her aura isn't that of an ordinary person. Yesterday, that barrister wasn't some hastily hired lawyer either. They showed up too perfectly. Henry looked at him, his gaze deepening. You suspect your wife has found a new backer, which is why she wants a clean break? Charles frowned. He didn't like how that sounded, but he couldn't deny the suspicion in his heart. Henry sighed, his voice slowing. Charles, whether she has a backer or not, what you did was wrong. You're clinging to the question of who these people are to avoid facing how you treated her. That remark made Charles's face turn cold, but this time he didn't blow up. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. He stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Her voice was still weak, tinged with a sob. Charles, I was so scared yesterday. The doctor said I need rest, but every time I think of Amelia's eyes, I shake. Does she hate me that much? In the past, words like this would make Charles soften. But today, he just felt exhausted. The image of her raising her hand to strike my mother flashed in his mind. He asked, Yesterday you raised your hand first. Why didn't you say so? The other end went dead silent. A few seconds later, Eleanor burst into tears. Are you blaming me? I was just so angry. That woman said horrible things. About me, I'm pregnant, my emotions are all over the place. Don't you believe me? Anymore? Charles closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. I'm just asking for the truth. Eleanor cried louder, claiming I had harmed her, claiming she was being bullied, claiming even he had changed because he suspected her. Normally, he would immediately deny it and comfort her, but today, he stayed silent for too long, a silence that panicked Eleanor. She quickly softened her tone. Charles, I don't want to make things difficult for her. I just want our child to have a legitimate status. I know she doesn't like me, but I truly didn't mean to. Those 3 words, our child, made Charles's eyes darken. He suddenly asked, Eleanor, exactly when did you conceive? The other end went silent again. This time, the silence was very brief, but long enough for him to hear the panic. She answered quickly. The doctor said it was around. You forgot? 6 months ago? Charles didn't say anything more. He told her to rest and hung up. By midday, my phone started buzzing constantly. I opened it to find messages from old university friends I hadn't spoken to in ages. Some asked if I was okay. Some sent a link saying to let them know if I needed help. I clicked on it and saw an anonymous article circulating online. The article talked about a /in24 rich family's adopted daughter who used marriage to trap a property CEO, then had twins to fight for the inheritance, and even assaulted a pregnant woman in her own home. Though it didn't name names, details like Kensington Holdings, Chelsea, twins, and the Davies family were enough for anyone who knew me to guess. In the comments, people called me manipulative. Some said women who use children to tie men down are terrifying. Some even pulled up an old photo of me at the hospital, saying I looked innocent but had a venomous heart. My mother noticed my expression change and took the phone. In just a few seconds, her face turned so icy that the maternity nurse standing nearby stopped talking. She didn't explode in anger. She just called Julian, her voice chillingly calm. Julian, someone is smearing your sister online. I'll give you 2 hours to find the source. But remember, don't shut it down immediately. I want to know who is behind it. From the other end came my third brother's crisp, alert voice. Don't worry. Mum. I don't work in PR just to film toothpaste adverts. Whoever messes with my sister, I'll send them back to primary school to relearn basic morals. In a luxury apartment near central London, Eleanor sat on the sofa. Opposite her was her PR manager, Simon Trent. Simon handed her a tablet, looking slightly worried. The article is gaining traction quickly, but if the other side has CCTV, this is very risky. Are you sure you want to push this? Eleanor looked at the comments insulting me, her lips curling into a cold sneer. Push it. The camera only caught me raising my hand, but she actually slapped me. I'm pregnant. Netizens will side with the weaker party. Simon hesitated. But the woman with her isn't simple. That barrister yesterday was very tough. Eleanor immediately threw a cushion onto the floor, her voice sharp. So what if? She's not simple? Amelia Davies is just a stray my family took in. What does she have besides clinging to Charles Kensington? If that bitch isn't cursed at until she can't lift her head, she'll actually think she has the right to compete with me. Simon didn't dare say more, nodding and going to contact his troll accounts. Eleanor placed her hand on her belly, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. Recently, Charles had started asking questions she didn't like. He asked about the conception timeline, asked why she raised her hand yesterday. She felt things slipping out of her grasp. No, she had waited too long to get back to Charles's side. She couldn't let an Amelia who had just given birth steal the person/one brother position that belonged to her. She picked up her phone and sent Charles a message. Charles, I don't want to live anymore. Is it only when my baby and I disappear that everyone will be satisfied? After sending it, she stared at the screen, waiting. But 5 minutes passed, and Charles didn't reply. At the same time, Charles was reading the article online. The photo of me holding my babies at the hospital made him frown deeply. He didn't like this feeling. Clearly, the article was defending Eleanor. Clearly, he used to think I was manipulative. But seeing those vicious comments under my photo, his chest tightened uncomfortably. Henry stood beside him, reading a few comments, and couldn't help swearing softly. These people are toxic. Insulting a woman who just gave birth. Charles said coldly, check the source of the article. Henry glanced at him. Now you. Want to check? If you had stood up and clarified things yesterday, it wouldn't have gotten to this point. Charles didn't argue. He looked at the picture of me with my head bowed, hugging my child, and his mind flashed back to that afternoon at the hospital. He was downstairs with Eleanor while I was upstairs alone. He had never asked if I was in pain. He hadn't even looked closely at his newborn children. A new notification popped up from Eleanor. Charles read it. In the past, he might have called her immediately, but today, his finger hovered over the screen for a long time before he put the phone down. Henry saw this, but said nothing. After a while, Charles asked, Henry, do you remember the night I woke up in the rehab hospital? Henry paused. I remember. Your wife cried so hard the doctors thought you were crashing again. Charles stayed silent. He actually remembered it vaguely. He opened his eyes to blinding white light, his throat burning, his body feeling like it had been crushed by a truck. The first person he saw wasn't Eleanor, but me. Eyes swollen, hair messy, hand still gripping his. When I saw he was awake, I smiled and cried, saying, Charles, you're awake. He had stared at me for a long time then. But after Eleanor returned, those memories were pushed aside like things that shouldn't exist. At the townhouse, my third brother Julian called my mother back in less than an hour and a half. My mother put it on speaker so I could hear. His tone was still playful, but the content was precise. Mum, the primary source is a gossip account connected to Simon Trent, Eleanor's PR manager. I've secured the transaction logs, posting schedules, and a list of their burner accounts. I haven't shut it down yet, letting them post more fake evidence. The more they post now, the louder the apology will have to be later. My mother frowned. Don't let your sister be abused for too long, Julian replied instantly. Don't worry, I've got people controlling the narrative pace. The dirtiest comments have all been screenshotted. Oh, and tell my sister not to read it. A beautiful new mother needs sleep, not toxic social media. Listening to him, I couldn't help but smile. Every time my third brother appeared, no matter how tense the situation, he found a way to create some breathing room. My mother hung up, turning to look at me. Hear that? Your brother has it handled. I looked down, tears falling. Perhaps I still wasn't used to the fact that I had a real family, unused to the reality that when trouble came, I didn't have to open my mouth to beg for help before someone stood up for me. Meanwhile, my second brother, William, was still in Cornwall. He stood outside a small run-down cottage in a narrow alley near the coast, waiting for the cottage retired nurse to answer the door. The old woman looked a bit scared when she saw him, likely because he looked so stern. William didn't rush. He showed his credentials, and clearly explained he was looking for information on a missing baby girl from over 20 years ago. When she heard about the silver bracelet, she was quiet for a long time. She said her memory was failing, but she never forgot that baby because the biological mother fainted right outside the ward. William asked if she remembered the stranger in the hospital. She frowned, trying to recall, and said, "There was a woman with a London accent asking around Victoria Harrington's ward." For days. The woman wore a silk scarf and had a small mole on the left side of her neck. She was with a man who looked gentle but kept darting his eyes around. William immediately pulled out photos of Beatrice and Arthur Davies. The old woman stared for a long time, her hands trembling. It's them. The resemblance is undeniable. The following afternoon in London, Henry stood beside Charles, noticing his changing expression, and said, "I traced the source of the initial article. It's tied to Simon Trent, Eleanor's manager." Charles remained silent. Henry added, "Don't tell me you still believe she's just a victim." Charles snapped his laptop shut, his voice dropping. "I want to know the exact timeline of her pregnancy. Check the clinic, her scan appointments, and her schedule over the plot. Past 8 months. Henry looked at him for a moment, finally nodding. "All right. But Charles, I have to be honest. Regarding how your wife is being smeared, you owe her a proper apology." That evening, Lord and Lady Kensington summoned Charles back to the townhouse. Lady Kensington sat in the living room, a video of me being cursed at online. Playing on her phone, she glared at him, her eyes red with fury. "When the twins grow up, if they see their mother being called a homewrecker, what are you going to tell them? That their father was too busy taking another woman to an Adirose ultrasound to protect their mother?" Charles didn't answer. Lord Kensington set his teacup down, his voice deep and heavy. "The Kensington family isn't short on money, but lacking a conscience will ruin us. You sort this mess with Eleanor out. If the child is yours, you take legal responsibility. But if you let her use this to make Amelia suffer, again I will disown you as my grandson." These words made Charles bow his head before his grandparents for the first time without arguing. 3 days later, I received a call from my second brother, William. I found the old files. During those years, an illegal child trafficking ring operated between London and the Southwest. There's not enough hard evidence yet to say the Davies family directly kidnapped you, but there are signs they knew you weren't an abandoned child. I'm requesting financial records for some unusual deposits the Davies family received around the time they adopted you. My mother opened her eyes, her voice so calm it was heartbreaking. "Do it by the book, but do it to the very end," William replied. "I know. There's one more thing. Mum, brace yourself." The nurse said the woman back then looked exactly like Beatrice Davies, especially the small mole on the left side of her neck. I jerked my head up. In my memories, Beatrice Davies did indeed have a small mole on her neck, usually hidden by a pearl necklace. A detail so small that if no one mentioned it, I would never have thought it related to the day I disappeared. After hanging up, the room was silent for a long time. The baby girl had nursed and fallen asleep in my arms. Her warm breath passed through my thin shirt. I held her, but my hands were freezing. "I always thought they didn't love me because I wasn't their biological child," I said very softly, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "But if they knew I had a family looking for me, if they knew my real name, why did they hide it? Why did they force me to be grateful for over 20 years? My mother sat down beside me, not rushing to answer. She gently stroked my hair, her voice choking. "Because some people treat their kindness as a commodity. They give a little and demand you pay for a lifetime. But Amelia, this was not your fault. You were just a baby. I knew I was just a baby, but my adult heart still ached." The years at the Davies house flashed through my mind like a scratched old film. I remembered, when I was 13, the school selected me for a national literature competition. I eagerly brought the letter home. Beatrice glanced at it and said, "Eleanor has ballet practice and needs someone to walk her there and back. Don't waste time on these things." I remembered when I was 18 getting into a place de Versailles, good accounting program, but she said the family only had enough money for Eleanor to do a short course abroad. I should just attend a local college. I remembered the day I married into the Kensington family. She held my hand and said, You must be grateful. The Davies family raised you. Now that you can help the family, don't be calculating. I had believed those words, believed them to the point where I turned myself into a living debt. That night, I took the initiative to call Arthur Davies. He answered fairly, quickly, his tone displeased. You finally remember to call your father? Eleanor has been unstable for days because of you, and your mother's face was slapped. Swollen. How far do you plan to take this? Hearing his voice, I suddenly felt strange. This man had been my father on paper. For over 20 years, yet after I had just given birth, he didn't ask if I was in pain, didn't ask about the twins, only asked how far I planned to take things. I spoke very calmly. Father, I want to ask you something. Did you and Mother truly just pick me up at an abandoned church in Surrey? The other end went dead silent. The silence dragged on so long I could hear his heavy breathing. A moment later, he snapped. Who's been telling you nonsense? If we didn't pick you up there, where did you come from? Don't listen to outsiders trying to stir up trouble and then turn around and doubt your adoptive parents. I closed my eyes. Then where is the silver bracelet I had on my wrist? When I was little? Arthur went silent again. This time I knew I had hit the mark. After a long while, he said, Children grow up, old things get lost. It's normal. Why are you asking about that? I gave a soft laugh, but my eyes burned. Because that bracelet was engraved with my real name, Amelia Harrington. I heard the sound of something dropping on the other end. He probably stood up, abruptly, and knocked over a glass of water. Then Beatrice's voice cut in, sharp and panicky. Amelia Davies, who told you these things? You find a new backer? And immediately turn around to bite the parents who raised you? Let me tell you, without me, you would have died on the street. The phrase was so familiar, but this time it didn't hurt. I just found it laughable. I replied, if it was truly a life-saving grace, I would repay it. But if it was a lie, I will take everything back. I hung up before she could curse further. My hand holding the phone was shaking. My mother immediately wrapped her arms around my shoulders. I leaned into her, not crying loudly, just letting the tears flow silently. The bedroom door cracked open. Charles stood outside. I don't know since when. Perhaps he had heard the latter half of the call. The way he looked at me was incredibly complex, no longer just suspicious, but shocked. He asked very softly, Amelia Harrington, what does that mean? I looked up at him. In that moment, I almost blurted out everything, but my mother squeezed my shoulder, reminding me of our initial plan. I wiped my tears, my voice hoarse but calm. It has nothing to do with you. That answer stopped him in his tracks. In the past, everything about me revolved around him. Now, even regarding my own identity, he was shut out. The morning of the Harrington & Co. launch in London, I woke up earlier than Luda, usual to attend the event at a grand luxury hotel in Mayfair, where Harrington & Co. was officially opening its flagship southern branch. Outside, it was a high-profile business gala with press, partners, tycoons, and media figures. Inside, everyone in my family knew this was the day the Harringtons would present me to the world. I sat in a private waiting room, hearing the chatter of guests outside, my hand unconsciously gripping a new silver bracelet, recreated based on the old design. The original hadn't been found yet, but my mother said she wanted me to wear a new one today, not to replace the past, but to remind me that my name had never been lost. Engraved on the inside were the words, Amelia Harrington. I rubbed the letters, a dull ache in my heart. For over 20 years, I lived under the name Amelia Davies, living as a debt to the Davies family. Today, I wasn't denying that name because it held the years I had lived through. But I could no longer let others bury the Amelia Harrington inside me. The guest list was extensive. The Davies family attended, just as my eldest brother predicted. Arthur Davies wore an old suit that had been meticulously ironed, trying to maintain a confident facade, though his eyes couldn't hide his anxiety. Beatrice wore her familiar pearl necklace, the small mole on her neck, hidden, but seeing her still gave me a chill. Eleanor was with them, her pregnancy bump prominent, wearing a pristine white maternity dress, her makeup expertly applied to make her look both fragile and elegant. She likely thought this was just a major business event, and the Davies family, using old connections with the Kensingtons, had managed to secure an invite to network with the Harringtons. When she saw Charles appear at the entrance, she immediately walked over to him, looking like someone in desperate need of protection. But Charles only supported her out of basic courtesy. His eyes darted around the ballroom as if searching for someone else. My father walked onto the stage. His deep, steady voice spoke about Harrington and Co. opening its flagship in London, about business directions and upcoming projects. I stood in the wings watching his back, feeling a lump in my throat. This man had searched for me for over 20 years. He used to be strict with the whole world, but when he met me in the hospital, his first words were, "Dad is late." After his brief speech, he paused for a few seconds, looking down at the guests. Today, apart from launching our new branch, I would like to announce a private, family matter. A matter my wife and I have waited over 20 years for. The atmosphere below shifted instantly. Faint whispers broke out, then quickly silenced as my mother stepped onto the stage. She reached her hand out toward me. I took a deep breath and walked out slowly. The lights in the ballroom weren't overly blinding, but as the eyes of hundreds of people converged on me, my legs felt slightly weak. In the crowd, Eleanor's face went completely white. Beatrice shot up from her seat but was pulled back down by Arthur. Charles stared at me without blinking, losing his usual composure for the very first time. He probably never thought. The woman he left behind at the hospital, the woman he assumed had nowhere to go, would today be standing on the stage of Harrington and Co., held by Richard and Victoria Harrington like their most prized treasure. My father held the microphone, every word ringing clear. This is our long-lost biological daughter, Amelia Harrington. Due to a tragedy over 20 years ago, she was separated from our family when she was just a baby. Today, we are officially bringing her home and announcing that Amelia will be the heiress, overseeing the London branch of Harrington and Co. moving forward. The entire ballroom was dead silent. A few seconds later, an uproar of whispers erupted. People turned to each other, asking if Amelia Harrington was the same person currently being torn apart online. Someone realized I was Charles, Kensington's wife. Others looked toward the Davies family with very strange expressions. I stood in the middle of the stage, hearing the noise swell, but feeling calmer than I expected. It turned out that when your family is holding your hand, the noise of the whole world is no longer terrifying. My mother took the microphone. She didn't speak long, but every sentence made the crowd grow quieter. My daughter recently gave birth, and her body is still weak, so today we didn't want to turn a private matter into a noisy spectacle. However, recently there have been malicious rumors targeting her, claiming she has no family, no backing, and used marriage and children to steal an ITI inheritance. I want to make it clear right here. My daughter does not need to fight for anyone's inheritance. What belongs to her, her parents will place directly into her hands. She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd, stopping very briefly on the Davies family. As for those who use the words gratitude and debt to force her to swallow humiliation, the Harrington family will deal with them through the law. That sentence turned Beatrice's face a sickly green. Eleanor clutched her belly, swaying slightly, but this time no one rushed forward to support her like before. My third brother Julian picked the perfect moment to play his compilation video. On the massive screen, the defamatory posts about me appeared right next to the CCTV footage from the living room, the accounts that posted them, the transaction histories, and the links to Simon Trent, Eleanor's PR manager. Everything was presented cleanly and clearly, without a single wasted word. The guests began talking even louder. Simon Trent, standing in the corner of the room, looked entirely drained of blood, hurriedly bowing his head to make a phone call. My eldest brother Oliver stepped onto the stage, his voice serene. My chambers have already issued legal notices to the relevant parties. Any fabricated statements or defamation against Miss Amelia Harrington will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Furthermore, we are currently gathering evidence regarding the concealment of Miss Harrington's true identity for many years. The last sentence nailed the entire Davies family to the floor. I took the microphone. My hands were slightly cold, but the voice that came out was steady. I used to think that being grateful meant enduring, bowing my head, and blaming myself whenever someone else was unhappy. Only later did I realize that gratitude doesn't mean letting others trample over your life. I thank those who truly helped me. But if anyone used a debt of upbringing to buy my silence, I'm sorry, but from today onwards, I will no longer pay you in tears. I looked down from the stage, my eyes skimming over Mr. and Mrs. Davies, over Eleanor, and finally landing on Charles Kensington. He stood there, his face whiter than mine was on the day I was discharged. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I knew exactly what I wanted. I said my final sentence very softly. My name is Amelia Harrington, and I will decide the rest of my life for myself. After the announcement, my mother took me to a private lounge. I had barely sat down when a knock came at the door. The person who walked in was Charles Kensington. No one in the room was surprised. He stood at the door, his eyes sweeping past my parents, my 3 brothers, and finally landing on me. For the frigid first time, the man who had made me bow my head for 3 years looked awkward. In front of my family, he said, "Amelia, I'd like to speak with you privately." Oliver instantly replied, "Inconvenient." Julian smirked. "Mr. Kensington, my sister just announced her identity. Her body is still weak, and her mood needs to remain stable. If you have something to say, put it in writing and send it to our legal team." I looked at Charles. This was the man who had sat in a car and coldly told me not to control him, who hung up when I tried to discuss divorce, who left me at the solicitor's office over a phone call from Eleanor. Now he stood before me, his eyes chaotic, as if he had so many questions. "Why are you a Harrington? Why? Did you hide it from me? Why didn't you say something sooner?" But those questions no longer mattered. I put my glass of water down and slowly stood up. My mother moved to support me, but I shook my head. I walked up to him, keeping a perfectly polite distance, and asked, "Mr. Kensington, are you ready to sign the divorce papers now?" Charles's face hardened. I saw pain in his eyes, belated regret, and a deep sense of unwillingness. But I didn't wait for his answer. Behind me, my father said coldly, "If you want to drag this out, the Harrington family's lawyers will entertain you to the bitter end." After my identity was revealed, London seemed entirely stripped of peace. News about the lost daughter of Harrington and Co. returning, about the smeared wife turning out to be an heiress, about the Davies family suspected of hiding an adopted child's identity, it all flooded the news pages. I didn't read much of it. My mother still controlled my phone usage as strictly as my postpartum diet, occasionally joking that if social media had any nutritional value, she'd consider letting me look at it for 10 more minutes. But even without reading it, I felt the tide had turned. People who had texted to ask if I really harmed Eleanor were now sending apologies. Relatives of the Davies family who had previously stayed silent started checking in with tones, a much friendlier than necessary. As for Charles, he didn't appear before me for 2 days, but the divorce appointment was yet to be rescheduled. I stayed temporarily in a serviced apartment in Mayfair, arranged by my mother, to avoid the noise at the Chelsea townhouse. The twins had grown used to their idea. Grandmother's scent, especially Lily, who was much better behaved the moment my blank mother held her. Julian called the little girl the princess who knows how to pick sides, while Alfie was dubbed the infant branch manager because he frowned so seriously even in his sleep. Those teasing remarks made my confinement period much less heavy. I still hurt, I was still tired, and there were still sleepless nights when the babies fussed. But in this apartment, no one blamed me for being weak. My mother brought me porridge. My father occasionally dropped by to look at his grandchildren and awkwardly slipped red envelopes of cash into their cots. Oliver brought documents over, but always checked if I had slept enough first. William, after every phone call, would say, "If you're tired, I'll handle the pie, miss. Rest, you don't need to listen to all of it." I gradually understood that having a home didn't mean living in a massive mansion. It meant that when you hurt, someone automatically lowers their voice. Outside, Eleanor refused to sit still. After the public revelation, she locked herself in her apartment, refusing to meet the press, but constantly messaging Charles. Sometimes she said the whole world was bullying her. Sometimes she said the baby couldn't handle the stress. And sometimes she accused him of changing his heart just because he found out I was a wealthy heiress. Charles didn't reply much initially. He was having someone check her clinic, records, and her schedule. The more he checked, the further things strayed from the story Eleanor had told. According to her, the baby was conceived during the baby was conceived, time they met after a private gala, but the clinic where she had her first scan recorded the gestational age as nearly 3 weeks older. 3 weeks was enough to push the conception date back to a trip to Edinburgh she claimed was for a commercial shoot. Henry brought the documents to Charles's office on a very cloudy afternoon. He placed the file on the desk, his expression grim. I tracked Eleanor's schedule. During the possible conception window, she was in Edinburgh for 3 days with the film crew for director Philip Gadsby. There are hotel bookings and a transfer from his account to her manager. Charles sat still, his hand resting on the file, not opening it immediately. He had probably guessed, but guessing and seeing the evidence were two different things. Henry looked at him, lowering his voice. Charles, I know this is hard to hear, but you must get a prenatal paternity test as soon as possible. If that baby isn't yours, you need to realize just how far you pushed your wife over a Lee. Charles opened the file. Every photo, every schedule, every hotel receipt was crystal clear. In one photo, Eleanor, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, stepped into a hotel lift next to a middle-aged man. That man was Philip Gadsby, a director who had promoted her in several TV projects. Charles stared at the photo for a long time. He didn't explode in rage like a betrayed man in a movie. Instead, he was terrifyingly calm. Perhaps because before seeing this evidence, a crack had already formed in his heart. Now, the evidence merely caused that crack to cave in completely. He picked up his phone and called Eleanor. When she answered, he didn't beat around the bush. Eleanor, I want a prenatal DNA test. The other end went so silent that even Henry, standing nearby, noticed. A moment later, Eleanor burst into tears. Charles, what do you mean? You suspect me? Our baby isn't even born. Yet, and his own father is doubting him. Don't you think that's cruel? Charles closed his eyes, his voice remaining deep. If it's my child, I'll take responsibility. But I need the truth, Eleanor cried harder. She said I had set her up, said the Harrington family was using their power to back her into a corner, said even he had changed because he knew I was rich. If it were before, these words might have made him soften. But now, he only felt exhausted. He asked, That month you were in Edinburgh with Philip Gadsby, weren't you? Eleanor's crying cut off abruptly. That silence answered for her. Charles hung up first. He put the phone down, looked up at Henry, and said hoarsely, Arrange the test. News of Charles demanding a DNA test quickly reached the Davies family. Beatrice called me in a panic, but I didn't answer. She switched to calling my mother, having sourced her number from somewhere. My mother looked at the screen, her lips curling into an icy smile, then answered. Beatrice's voice was frantic and furious. Victoria Harrington, right? I don't care how powerful your family is, but don't push Eleanor too far. She's pregnant. If something happens to her, can you bear the consequences? My mother sat by the cot looking at Lily sleeping, her voice perfectly calm. Mrs. Davies, a pregnant woman, should conduct herself properly, not use her pregnancy to deceive one person after another. And if you're worried about your daughter, advise her to tell the truth soon. The longer a lie sits, the more it hurts when it breaks. Beatrice choked, then screamed that we were bullying them with our status. My mother didn't get angry. She simply replied, You used the debt of raising her to bully my daughter for over 20 years. I haven't even settled that score. Yet, so don't rush to play the victim. When the results were placed in front of Charles, he sat for a long time without speaking. Henry stood nearby, also silent. In the Kensington living room, Lord and Lady Kensington looked at the piece of paper, so furious that Lady Kensington had to take her medication. Lord Kensington slammed his hand on the clotter table, his voice shaking with rage. For a child that doesn't even share Kensington blood, you abandoned your wife while she was giving birth alone. Charles Kensington, you are brilliant. Charles bowed his head. This time, he couldn't defend himself. Any words he spoke would only make him look more pathetic. Eleanor was summoned. The moment she entered, she fell to her knees and cried. She said she was tricked too. Said. Director Philip Gadsby forced her. Said she was so terrified of losing Charles that she didn't dare tell the truth. But every word came too late. Lady, Kensington looked at her, eyes full of disgust. You didn't just lie to my grandson, you ruined a woman who had just given birth, letting the whole world curse her. Your belly can't hide the rot in your heart. Eleanor shook her head frantically. She turned to Charles, crawling over to grab his hand. Charles, I truly love you. I was just afraid of losing you. If Amelia hadn't gotten in the way, if she hadn't been reclaimed by the Harringtons, it wouldn't have come to this. It's all her fault. Charles looked at her, no pity left in his eyes. He pulled his hand away, his voice terribly hoarse. No one forced you to lie. No one forced you to use that baby to harm Amelia. Eleanor collapsed, crying until she could barely breathe. Beatrice ran in to hold her daughter, turning to accuse the Kensingtons of being heartless. But Lord Kensington merely called security coldly to escort them out. The Davies family had thought Eleanor's baby was their winning card. Only today, when the card was flipped, did they realize there was nothing underneath but ash. That afternoon, Charles came to see me. This time, he didn't come empty-handed. In his hand were the fully signed divorce papers. He stood at the door of the apartment, looking much more haggard than a few days ago. My mother gave him an unaffectionate look, but let him in because it was time to end this. I sat on the sofa. The twins were asleep in the next room. He placed the file in front of me, his voice so low I could barely hear it. I've signed it. I looked at his signature. The strokes were still strong and decisive, but in some places, the ink was thicker, as if he had pressed the pen down for a long time. I didn't know what was in his heart, nor did I want to ask. I just picked up the pen and signed the remaining confirmation sections as Oliver had instructed. When I put the pen down, my hands weren't shaking. The one with shaking hands was Charles. After the paperwork was complete, he didn't leave immediately. He looked at me, his eyes reddening slightly. Amelia, I'm sorry. This time it didn't sound forced. It wasn't a rehearsed script, and it lacked his familiar arrogance. Hearing it, I felt strangely at peace. Perhaps if this apology had come on the day I gave birth, I would have cried until I couldn't stand. If it had come on the day he left me at the solicitor's office, I might still have felt a painful blank scree's life. Softness. But now, it came after too many truths, too many wounds, after I had already dug myself out of the rubble. I stood up to see him out. Not because I still harbored feelings, but because I wanted a decent end to a part of my life where I had once been truly sincere. Before stepping out, he turned back to look at me. Can I see the children in the future? I was quiet for a few seconds. My mother stood behind me, not interfering. I knew this was my decision. Finally, I said, you are their father. If you fulfill your responsibilities properly, I won't forbid it. But do not use the children to pull me back into that marriage. Charles looked at me for a long time, then replied hoarsely, I understand. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood still for a few seconds, then turned back into the room. The twins were still fast asleep, their hands resting next to each other. I leaned down and kissed each of their foreheads, feeling my cruisinid axe heart lighten, as if a noose around my neck had finally been untied. Many months after the divorce was finalized, I took the twins up to Edinburgh. The flight wasn't long, but for someone who had just recently given birth, every step felt like it took all my energy. My mother had prepared everything so thoroughly that even Julian had to sigh. Mom, the only thing you're missing is renting out the entire airport for my sister. My mother shot him a glare, replying calmly, if I could rent it without people laughing at us, I'd consider 8. Julian immediately raised his hands in surrender. Meanwhile, my father stood nearby holding Alfie, his face as stern as if he were signing a £1 billion contract. The tiny baby lay in his arms, almost swallowed up by his strong grip, yet he looked more nervous than he did giving a keynote speech at a business summit. Watching the scene, I couldn't help but laugh. My father frowned. What are you laughing at? I shook my head, trying to suppress my smile. I just think you hold your grandson with a very chairman-like aura, Julian immediately chimed in. That's right, chairman of the infant shaking hands division. My father glared at him coldly. Shut your mouth. Julian shut up instantly, but his eyes crinkled with laughter. The atmosphere at the airport was loud but warm. My mother supported me step by step. Oliver walked behind, handling the luggage and paperwork. William pulled a suitcase while observing the surroundings out of occupational habit. I think wealthy families were distant and suffocatingly strict, but my Harrington family was weird in a very grounded way. They could discuss shares right at the dinner table, but also fight over who got to hold the babies to the point where the nanny had to set a schedule. They could be incredibly serious when it came to law and honor, but they could also argue just because Lily smiled at someone else first today. It was these trivial things that made me feel I was truly coming home, not just returning to a strange dynasty. I started learning from the smallest things, learning how to read product codes, how to tell 18K from 24K gold, how to read diamond grading certificates, checking sales ledgers, and listening to staff advise clients. Everyone taught me a little in their own way. No one expected me to become a genius overnight, but everyone believed I could learn. During those days, Charles traveled up to Edinburgh several times. The first time, he was blocked at the gates of the estate by Julian. My third brother wore a hoodie, holding a coffee cup, looking like he was just out for a stroll, but his words gave no quarter. "Ah, Mr. Kensington, my sister is resting. On the day she gave birth, you were busy taking someone else to a scan. Now that she's studying gemstones, you suddenly have so much free time." Charles stood outside the gates, his face looking awful, but he didn't argue. He said, "I want to see Amelia." Julian took a sip of coffee and smirked. "See her? For what? If you want to apologize, send a letter. If you want to get back together, throw it in the bin. If you want to check on the kids, book an ever-one appointment through the lawyers. Our family operates a very civilized traffic control system now." The staff standing nearby lowered their heads to hide their smiles. Charles looked at him, probably understanding for the first time what it felt like to be openly hated by your ex-wife's family without being able to do a thing about it. I knew he had come not because anyone told me, but because Julian later came to the room and recounted it with the vividness of a football commentator. He mimicked Charles's expression, mimicked the line, "I want to see Amelia," making seven abaya. My mother laughed so hard she had to tell him to stop exaggerating. I smiled too, but after smiling, I went quiet for a moment. My mother noticed and asked, "Do you want to see him?" I shook my head. Not right now. I wasn't. So full of hatred that I couldn't bear to hear his name, but I wasn't calm enough to sit across from him like an old acquaintance either. My mother didn't force it. She just said, "Then don't see him. You don't need to be polite with your own pain." I remembered those words for a very long time. Before, I always tried to be polite to the people who hurt me, afraid of being too ruthless, afraid of people calling me petty. Now I knew that healing requires boundaries. After discussing it with the solicitor, I agreed to let him visit the twins on a Bakke 6 fixed schedule. Every time someone from the Harrington family or the nanny had to be present, he wasn't allowed to take them out alone. The first time he saw Alfie and Lily after the divorce, I wasn't there. My mother held the baby girl, the nanny held the baby boy, and he stood in the drawing room of the Harrington Dashan estate, looking so tense that Julian whispered to me over the phone, "He's looking at his kids like their stock's about to crash. He wants to hold them, but is terrified of doing the wrong move." I laughed, but I also felt lighter. I didn't want to turn my children into tools for revenge. What I needed wasn't to cut him out of the twins' lives, but to ensure he didn't use them to pull me back into that old marriage. A week later, Lord and Lady Kensington also traveled up to Edinburgh. Lady Kensington was weaker than before, but she insisted on coming because she missed her great-grandchildren. I agreed to meet them in the drawing room. When she saw me, her eyes immediately turned red. She took my hand, her voice shaking. "Amelia, my dear, I'm sorry. I always thought keeping the marriage intact was best for you and the twins. Now, I understand that I loved you, but I unintentionally forced you to suffer more." I shook my head. I held no resentment toward her. "Grandmother, you truly loved me, I know," she cried, hugging me very lightly, afraid I was still weak. "If you still hate Charles in the future, that's fine. But if you can, let us see the little ones from time to time. I promise never to mention getting back together again." I looked at her, my heart softening. I won't forbid you, grandmother. As long as you're healthy, having more people love the twins is a good thing. Lord. Kensington stood beside her, his eyes also red, but he tried to maintain his stern facade. He handed me a folder, saying it was a separate trust fund he and his wife were gifting to the twins, completely unrelated to Charles. I was about to decline, but my mother held my hand back. She looked at Lord Kensington, her tone polite but clear. If you are gifting this to your great-grandchildren out of love, Amelia can accept it on their behalf. But this does not change the fact that the two of them are divorced. Lord Kensington nodded immediately. I understand. We aren't using money to force her hand. That sentence brought me relief. There are some affections that don't need to be severed, they just need to be placed in the right context. I might no longer be the granddaughter-in-law of the Kensington family, but Alfie and Lily were still their great-grandchildren. That didn't make me weak. On the contrary, it made me realize I was strong enough not to need hatred as armor. Finally, I met with Charles privately one afternoon at a tea room near Hyde Park, in London. It was the first time since the divorce that we sat opposite each other without the children, without paperwork, and without family standing between us. He had lost quite a bit of weight, and the arrogance on his face had faded. When the waiter set down the tea and left, he looked at me for a long time, before saying, Amelia, I owe you a proper apology. I held my teacup, not replying immediately. He continued, his voice hoarser. I'm sorry for taking your care for granted. Sorry for believing Eleanor, for leaving you to give birth alone, and for letting others smear your name. I know saying this now is too late, but I still wanted to say it. Not so you'll forgive me, but because I need to admit I was wrong. I looked at the man across from me. This was the Charles Kensington I had desperately wanted for 3 years. A man willing to bow his head, willing to admit he was wrong, willing to look directly at what he had done. If he had appeared sooner, I probably would have hugged him and cried. But now, I only felt a very faint ache, like touching a scar that had already closed. I said, I accept your apology, but I don't want to get back together. Charles gave a slight nod, as if he had anticipated this. He looked out the glass window. At the park? Then asked very softly, will I ever have a chance in the future? I was silent for a moment. In the past, I thought if he ever asked this question, I would be so happy I'd cry. Now, I only felt pity for both of us. I put my teacup down, looking at him calmly. Sometimes, a train doesn't leave because it was driving too fast. It leaves because while it was waiting for you, you were busy looking at someone else. Charles bowed his head, his hands resting on the table clenched, but he didn't try to argue. I understand, he said very quietly. I stood up first. As I walked past him, I didn't stop. Outside, my second brother William was waiting. In the car because the family still wasn't comfortable letting me meet Charles. Alone. I got in the car. William looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked simply, You all right? I nodded. I'm all right. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, If you're not all right, that's fine too. Our family doesn't punish people for not being all right. I looked out at the calm London streets, letting out a soft laugh. You're right. I don't need to be all right all the time anymore. But strangely, after that meeting, I truly felt my heart lighten, not because Charles apologized, but because I was finally able to hear that apology without wanting to turn back. A year later, I was back in London as the head of the Harrington & Co. Southern branch. Heathrow Airport was as crowded and loud as ever, but the feeling in my heart was vastly different from the day I had left this city in exhaustion. That day, Alfie and Lily were sitting in a double pushchair. They had just turned one, plumper and sharper than I expected. Alfie still had the demeanor of a little old man, just as Julian had said. Whenever a stranger leaned in to tease him, he'd frown and stare back, looking hilariously serious. Lily was the exact opposite. If anyone smiled at her, she'd wave immediately, babbling away, as if networking. Julian walked beside us, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, claiming to be the bodyguard and chief image officer for his niece and nephew. Hearing this, my mother said, Stop teaching them nonsense. They're only one. They don't need to build a personal brand yet. Julian replied with utter seriousness. Mum, a brand must be built early. Look at Alfie. He already has the cold aura of a CEO. I laughed out loud, leaning down to adjust their scarves. Over the past year, I had learned so much. Learned how to be a mother without blaming myself every time they cried. Learned how to work without fearing my questions sounded stupid. Learned how to walk into a boardroom as Amelia Harrington, not the Amelia Davies who always bowed her head in the Kensington house. The London branch of Harrington & Co. had stabilized. Initially, I made quite a few mistakes. Once, I signed off on the wrong batch codes, and Oliver made me sit and listen to contract explanations for over an hour. Another time, I chose display models that didn't suit the London market. My mother pointed it out very bluntly, but afterwards took me out for afternoon tea as compensation for my dentist's mental distresses. I didn't become a strong woman overnight. I just slowly picked up the pieces of myself and discovered that when put back together, they could still form a very beautiful shape. As for Eleanor, she fell from grace faster than anyone expected. After the DNA results were leaked, she lost almost all her endorsements. Director Philip Gadsby initially denied the relationship, but the hotel evidence, transfers, and texts left him no room to deny it. Eleanor gave birth amidst the chaos. The child was later cared for by the Davies family, while she was sued for defaming my character and falsifying PR information. I didn't ask too much about her. Not because I was so noble that I didn't care, but because I didn't want my life to continue revolving around the downfall of someone who had hurt me. Occasionally, the press mentioned her. I just skimmed it and closed the page. There are some people who, if their suffering still brings you joy, it means they still occupy a space in your heart. I didn't want Eleanor to have that space anymore. The Davies family also steadily declined. Arthur Davies's hardware business was investigated financially. Many old loans were called in. The case of the silver bracelet finally saw progress. William found the bracelet in an old wooden box tucked at the bottom of a wardrobe in the Davies house after the authorities executed a legal search warrant. Engraved clearly on the date too. Bracelet were the words Amelia Harrington, and on the inside was my date of birth. When I saw the photo of the bracelet, I cried for a long time. Not out of surprise, but because the evidence confirmed that for over 20 years, I was forced into gratitude based on a lie. Beatrice still stubbornly claimed she only hid it because she was afraid of losing me, saying she had genuine feelings from raising me. But by then, I no longer needed to argue with her. True affection doesn't begin by hiding a child from her biological parents. I agreed to repay the Davies family the exact sum of upbringing expenses that Oliver had calculated, plus a little extra support so they couldn't call me heartless. On the day she signed the confirmation papers, Beatrice cried, calling me cold-blooded, saying she raised me only for me to turn my back on her. I looked at her, my heart no longer wavering as it once did. If you ever truly loved me, as a mother I thank you, but you also hid me from my real family and forced me to yield until I lost my own life. From today, the money is settled, and the gratitude ends here. Arthur Davies sat beside her, looking much older. He didn't say sorry. Perhaps. Some people can never learn to bow their heads to someone they always viewed as beneath them. I didn't force it. I signed my name, stood up, and left. Outside the door, my mother was waiting. She didn't ask if I was hurting. She just opened the car door and said, "Let's go home for dinner. Your father is making soup today." I heard that and burst out laughing. "Dad knows how to make soup," my mother replied seriously. "He doesn't, which is exactly why the whole family needs to be there to witness it." Charles Kensington had changed a lot over the past year. He no longer appeared unexpectedly in front of me, no longer used flowers, gifts, or the children to beg for a reconciliation. He visited Alfie and Lily strictly on schedule, paid child support in full, and even learned how to change nappies after the nanny. Criticized him for holding his son like a classified document. The first time he changed Alfie's nappy, the boy peed straight onto his tailored shirt. Charles stood frozen in shock, while Julian laughed so hard he had to lean against the doorframe. Later, Julian recounted in the family group chat that Mr. Kensington has been officially knighted by our nephew in a sacred plains paternal ritual. My father replied with a single word, "Nonsense," but I knew the semina. A whole family had laughed. Small things like this made the post-divorce relationship much less jagged. Charles was no longer my husband, but he was learning how to be a father, and I was calm enough to watch him learn without softening my heart into returning. One crisp winter morning, I bumped into Charles. Perhaps he knew my schedule for the day. He held out a small box, his voice very low. I've remembered a lot of things. I remember you staying up to change my flannels. I remember you crying in the hallway when the doctor said my legs might not recover. I remember you saying that when I woke up, you'd wheel me out to the balcony to see the roses bloom. I heard you then, it's just that later. I deliberately forgot. He looked up at me, his eyes red, but he didn't let the tears fall. Amelia, I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I still want to give this back to you. Not so. You'll remember me, but so I can remember how beautifully I was once loved. I took the box. Inside was a handkerchief. My heart ached very softly, like the wind brushing over an old scar. I had once desperately wanted him to. I remember wanted it so badly that during his cold nights I wondered if I just hadn't loved him enough. Now he remembered, but I was no longer standing in the bruises. Same spot waiting. I closed the box and looked at him calmly. Thank you for returning it, and thank you for finally remembering. Charles looked at me, a very small glimmer of hope in his eyes, but I didn't let it grow. But I no longer need that apology to keep living my life. He stood perfectly still. The words weren't sharp or cold, but I knew they hurt. He lowered his head, and after a long time, replied, I know. Alfie, in his pushchair, suddenly woke up, looking at Charles with those familiar, serious eyes, then babbled a sound as if issuing a critique. The heavy atmosphere was strangely eased by the baby's voice. Charles leaned down and asked softly, Can Daddy hold you for a moment? I looked at him, then at my son. Finally, I nodded. He picked Alfie up, his movements much more practiced now. The little boy looked at him for a few seconds, then grabbed his collar. Charles let out a very soft laugh, a laugh that was both joyful and full of bitter regret. My mother turned to watch the scene, but said nothing. She had once hated Charles immensely, and she still didn't like him. But she also understood that I was learning how to stop letting the past control me. After a few minutes, Charles handed Alfie back to me. He didn't ask for more time, didn't mention getting back together. He just said he would come to see the children on schedule. I nodded. Okay. We parted ways in the corridor of the building. He stood watching me and the babies walk toward the exit, and I didn't turn back. Not because I was afraid of softening, but because I knew the road ahead was entirely mine. Outside, the winter sun hit the pavement not too harsh, just enough to make you feel warm. That evening, the Harrington family had a reunion dinner at the London Prenatal townhouse. My father truly did make the soup, but the taste was so indescribable that Julian only took one sip before seriously proposing the dish be added to the list of assets not to be inherited. My father icily told him he could go outside and eat instant noodles. My mother laughed while ladling more soup for my father, saying next time he should let the chef cook and just stand nearby to direct. Oliver held Lily, seriously reading the terms of an educational trust fund to her, making the little girl yawn expansively. William held Alfie. His nose was being grabbed by the baby, but he sat as still as if on a covert mission. Julian looked at his niece and nephew, his eyes lighting up. I have an idea. Harrington & Co. should release a children's jewelry line with Alfie and Lily as the faces of the campaign. One is cold, the other is sweet. I guarantee it'll go viral. The whole table chorused. No. Julian clutched his chest, lamenting that PR geniuses are always misunderstood. I laughed until tears pricked my eyes. Amidst that laughter, I sat beside my mother, looking at my two children, looking at my father, looking at my brothers, and suddenly felt my heart find an incredible peace. I used to think happiness meant having Charles Kensington turn back, meant being acknowledged as his true wife, meant holding on to a house that had gone cold long ago. Only later did I understand that some doors close not to punish you, but so you can hear your family calling from another direction. I spent many years learning how to love someone and shed many more tears, learning how to love myself again, but luckily I was still in time. In time to be a mother to Alfie and Lily with a heart free of resentment. In time to be a daughter to my parents, a sister to my 3 loud brothers, in time to just be Amelia Harrington, and not the enduring shadow in someone else's life. That night, after the twins fell asleep, I went out to the balcony for a moment. Winter in London carried a crisp, light breeze. Down in the garden, the golden lights illuminated the green foliage. My mother stepped out and draped a shawl. Over my shoulders, a habit she had never dropped. She asked, "What are you thinking about?" I leaned against her shoulder and smiled. I was thinking, if Uncle Edward hadn't walked into that hospital room that day, I don't know what would have become of me. My mother was quiet for a few seconds before she said, "Even if your uncle hadn't walked in that day, I believe that eventually you would have walked out on your own. I'm just lucky I found you at the right time to walk with you through the hardest part of the road." I held her hand. This time, I didn't hesitate anymore. I called out very softly, "Mum." She trembled, then pulled me into a tight embrace. In my mother's arms, I felt my heart finally come to rest. It turns out that after all the shattering, a person can still start over, not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let the past dictate that you should love yourself any less. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and see you next time.